I'm going to start with some introductions here. There we go. And welcome. I am providing welcoming remarks. So first of all, I'm Sam Fernald. I'm director of the New Mexico Water Resources Research Institute. And I would love to just welcome you all here today. We're so happy to see everybody. It's a beautiful day in Albuquerque. We're going to be talking about some of the most critical issues facing our region, our country, the world, that being water. And I had some words to wax poetic on the topic, but I'm already running late, so I don't want to cut into our amazing speakers' time. So I'm just going to go straight to some welcoming remarks. Sarah from NMSU student, but also from Alamogordo, has amazingly brought a whole group of Alamogordo High School students here. So thanks to all of you for coming. That's a great addition to the group. I wanted to really thank Michael Lujan Mayordomo of Nambe Pueblo for hosting the field trip yesterday to Nambe Falls Reservoir and Dam, and also Reclamation deserves thanks for making that happen. We have a great program that'll just start with some real giants in the world of water. We have a couple, I guess I'll just give a real brief bio for Tanya Trujillo. It's really amazing, having been in the heart of critical water issues for New Mexico, for this region, the Rio Grande, the Colorado River, and the nation. She most recently was, for the Department of Interior, Assistant Secretary for Water and Science, and now serves as I unfortunately don't know, Tanya, your official title. I kind of imagine it as water guru for New Mexico, to the governor through the Office of the State Engineer. Previously served as executive director of the Colorado River Board of California, and was also, when I first met her, senior counsel to U.S. Senate Energy and counselor to the Assistant Secretary for Water and Science, the job she eventually took herself. So really amazing. We're going to also hear from this team of speakers from Esteban Lopez, and he is now the Upper Colorado, sorry about my voice, Colorado River Compact Commissioner and the governor's representative on Colorado River matters, and was previously Commissioner of Reclamation, which is amazing, and also director of the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, along with other great positions. So these two have been in the heart of water, and not just as academics or studiers, but really the actors making things happen. So I'd like to welcome Tanya Trujillo and Esteban Lopez to the stage.
Jump in here. I'll just jump in. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you very much to the Institute for having us and for sponsoring this conference once again. It's always a highlight of the New Mexico water work that we do, and a way to highlight lots of the issues that we're working on. I am Tanya Trujillo. As was announced, I'm recently back here in New Mexico and am delighted to have been appointed by the governor to be a water policy advisor for the state, and to work very closely with the folks at the State Engineer Office and the Interstate Stream Commission. And my title is officially the Deputy State Engineer, and I think Esteban was previously had that role, and It's great to be back here working with colleagues and friends that I've known for many, many years. And I am honored to be here. Oops. I'm honored to be here. I am delighted to be talking about the Colorado River. Sorry? Okay. Thanks. I'm delighted to be talking about the Colorado River Basin as a kickoff to this conference, because that's an area that I have been working on for many years. And I will just kick off by saying I won an award a few years ago at a conference, the Colorado River Water Users Conference, and this is an Oscar in case you can't tell. And it was in honor of the fact that I won this for the role of Sybil, a starring role of Sybil, because I've had so many different jobs and worked on these issues for in so many different capacities. And I think just to go over that, I started my career in private practice in Santa Fe, and then moved to be general counsel of the Interstate Stream Commission, and Esteban was the director then and my boss at that time, and was also able to work on issues from the U.S. Senate perspective, from the Department of Interior perspective, from the state of California perspective. So went from an upper basin situation to a lower basin situation, and also worked in philanthropy and with some of the NGOs that have a big role in the basin now. So, but my most recent position was working as the Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the Department of the Interior, overseeing reclamation and USGS. I was able to intersect with a lot of these issues along the way. I always had my New Mexico hat on in all of those other positions, and was fond of relaying the perspective of coming from Santa Fe, where we have a mix of groundwater and surface water. We have snowmelt, snowpack, and snowmelt that's part of the water supply. We have recycled water. We have water conservation requirements. We have limitations on growth and expansion with respect to water supply uses. And all of those issues form the foundation of how I approach water, thinking about water, regardless of what the geography is that I might have been working on at the time. It also involves the fact that from a municipality's perspective, we were also very closely involved with the surrounding tribes and pueblos in the region, and also the agricultural users that form the basis of how we manage water pretty much everywhere in the West. So it's been great to have that perspective. In thinking about how to frame our discussion today, we thought I would do a brief introduction. Esteban will go through some slides in more detail, and then I can wrap up and perhaps amplify some of the points that he has raised, and maybe provide another perspective, either from some lower basin perspective, or thinking about things from our partners in Mexico, or and we'll see how that goes. I think a general framing that I was thinking about was to always remember, especially when you're talking about Colorado River issues, that we're mindful of the past and thinking about, we just celebrated the 100th anniversary, Esteban will talk about that, the 100th anniversary of the Colorado River Compact. But obviously the residents in the basin, and in particular the tribal presence in the basin, extends back many, many, many millennia or decades, or hundreds of years and thousands of years prior to that. So thinking about their presence and legacy is a key element of how we approach issues today when we're thinking about the present and the present day challenges. Of course, climate change is front and center in that, and the short history of the past 20 years, which has kind of been the time that I've been working closely on these issues, we've seen a huge shift in the decreasing amount of precipitation and the more erratic amount of precipitation that we've been seeing, and thinking about how that backdrop frames the agreements that have been entered into and the perspectives that are applied to the issues as we go forward. But that's kind of the key focus in my mind at the moment, is the going forward part, and thinking about how to plan for the future, how to be mindful of using the foundation and the experience that we have from the past, but taking it into the direction and building the resources that we're going to need going forward. And one of those key elements is just the workforce and the future communities that we need to be building. And so I come back again to thank institutes like New Mexico State, of course, the other universities here in New Mexico, the capabilities that we have to think about training and mentoring the next generation is something I think we all need to be mindful of. I just want to relay a couple personal perspectives. I am currently in a role that I have kind of as a model of a man named Bill Hume, who some of you may know. He was a journalist by profession, but was brought on during the Richardson administration to be a governor's advisor, and we worked with him in that role. And he and Esteban and I actually have a experience where he brought us down to Albuquerque one day and introduced us to John Fleck, who was a reporter at the time at the Journal, and we had the fun experience of having what John Fleck terms as his first Colorado River discussion, where we talk through the kind of dynamics of being an upper basin state and how that reflects on the general water management issues, and how the Colorado River, the meaningful role the Colorado River plays with respect to New Mexico water supplies and New Mexico, and serves the population in many, many ways. And the other kind of key mentor that I always have in mind when thinking about these issues is Jim Dunlap, who was from the San Juan Basin. He was the chair of the Interstate Stream Commission, and really has a lasting legacy among New Mexico water leaders in terms of helping guide us through some difficult negotiations on Colorado River issues in particular, and particularly important issues like the Navajo settlement in the Northwest. So really, I'm, again, just grateful for the opportunity to be here today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have been working on these issues for so many years with friends and colleagues like Mr. Lopez. And really, we'll just kick it off over to you, and then we can tag team a little bit as we go. So thank you all very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, WRRI, for this opportunity to come to speak to this group. I really like the moniker that Sam gave Tanya, water guru. I might go water Yoda or something like that, but anyway, although I'm probably the one with the Yoda ears, so anyway. As has been mentioned here, I'm going to give you kind of what I think is a bit of a Colorado River 101 in terms of how water is allocated amongst the Colorado River Basin states and Mexico. And I'm also going to talk you've probably been reading a lot in the press about kind of a crisis on the Colorado River, and you may have a pretty good sense of what that is as a result of those press accounts. But I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what really drove that crisis, and how we've reacted, and where we're going from here. So with that, I will begin. So as mentioned, the Colorado River Compact was signed in 1922, just over 100 years ago. We celebrated the 100-year anniversary last year. This signing ceremony took place in Santa Fe at the governor's mansion, and we had some photos recently of kind of the players in the Colorado River as well. This is a basin map of the Colorado River system, and it's not quite complete. The portion down in it's cut off at the border. It extends into Mexico. It's not a big area in Mexico, but it does extend into Mexico. And you'll notice on this map, it's basically the basin is split into two sub-basins, the upper basin, the lower basin. There's a diagonal line across northern Arizona. That is the dividing line. And on the river itself, that point is at Lee Ferry, right below Glen Canyon Dam. And that the 22 compact basically didn't allocate water amongst all the 7 basin states. Rather, about as far as they could get was to say, determine how much water they had to allocate and split that between the upper basin and the lower basin. Later, there was and they also held some back for dealing with, allocating some to Mexico. So what they did was they allocated 7.5 million acre feet per year to the upper basin, or up to 7.5 million acre feet. Another 7.5 million acre feet to the lower basin on the main stem, and then they gave the lower basin an additional million for that is considered to be for tributary uses primarily in Arizona. In 1944, we dealt with the Mexico needs, and Mexico got 1.5 million acre feet. So 7.5 and 7.5, 15 plus 1, 16 plus 1.5, 17.5 million acre feet is what they kind of divvied up. You'll see in just a minute, that's much more water than we have to deal with right now. Then in 1948, the Upper Colorado River Compact was entered into. And that compact basically implemented the 1922 compact in the upper basin. It split, it divided up the waters due the upper basin to the upper basin states. It gave 50,000 acre feet off the top to that little portion of Arizona that is in the upper basin. And the rest of that, so it's 7.5 million less 50, it split up on a percentage basis. New Mexico got 11.5% or 11.25% of that allocation. And Rolf Schmidt-Peterson, that's going to speak a little later, is going to talk about how that allocation came up specifically. Colorado is by far the largest beneficiary of the upper basin with over 50%. And the compact also established a compact commission, and it provided really an opportunity for collaboration among the upper division states to work together to solve issues. This is a map that kind of focuses in on some key features of the upper basin. It shows that bottom arrow shows where Lee Ferry is, just below Glen Canyon Dam and Lake Powell. And it also shows the ovals in there show the Colorado River Storage Project initial units. The northernmost is on the Utah-Wyoming state line. It's Flaming Gorge Reservoir. Then we have Aspinall unit in Colorado and San Juan Reservoir in New Mexico. It also shows the percentages that each state gets. Remember, those percentages, if we actually had 7.5 million to work with in the upper basin, New Mexico, on the basis of that percentage, would get just about 840,000 acre feet per year. The reality is, we don't get anywhere near that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So, getting to the problem that you've been hearing about in the press in the last year or two, let me back up a bit. If I know how to back up this, yeah. let me talk a little bit about the reservoirs. This slide shows Lake Powell. Lake Powell is the second largest reservoir in the United States, just under 24, or just about 24 million acre feet of storage capacity originally. There's been a lot of sedimentation since, but it's the second largest. The largest is right below that, right near the city of Las Vegas. That's Lake Mead. That's just over 25 million acre feet. So huge storage capacity on this system. So the problem we were talking about was in about the year 2000, both those reservoirs were close to full. This graph shows the combined capacity of both those reservoirs and where we were at. We were at about 42, 43 million acre feet of storage at that point. You can see that from there on, the drought began, and there was a precipitous drop in storage as we continued to use water. The lower basin primarily continued to use water without really giving a lot of consideration to what was coming in. So after about in 2005 or so, we started negotiating for some what was called the 2007, what ended up being adopted in 2007. It was the interim operating guidelines to how we coordinate the operation of Lakes Powell and Mead. And that was a hard-fought battle between the upper basin and the lower basin. And so you can see that starting, in around 2007 or so, it stabilized the system a little bit. The decline wasn't nearly as sharp, but it didn't really take care of everything. And then you get to about 2017, 18 timeframe, and you see again the hydrology kind of just overtakes things, and the decline continues. By 2022, we were at about 13 million acre feet by the end of 2022. And I'll show you why that was seen as such a problem. But before that, here's just a visual of Lake Mead in 2015. That white is the mineral deposits that's left on the cliffs as that reservoir drops. That line, or the vertical distance of that white line is on the order of 150 feet. Given that reservoir is hundreds of miles long, or at least probably close to 150 miles long, that's a huge amount of water. So that really highlights the problem that we were dealing with. And I'll show you now what the specifics of that problem were. This is a cross-section of Glen Canyon Dam. You see the 3,700 feet of elevation. That would be about where it's full. And back in April of 2022, it was down below 3525. 3525 was the elevation that we were hoping to protect in there with the 2007 guidelines and some later drought contingency plans that we did. But we just went right by that. And the problem is that, those tubes that are those diagonal lines across the dam, the first one, the higher angle one, those are the penstocks that feed the hydro generators on the downstream side of the line. That's how you generally release water out of that reservoir. And we were getting dangerously close to it. We needed to have a buffer above that, and we weren't sure exactly what that was, because as you keep dropping water through there, you start getting vortices and air entrainment in that. And if you get that, then you start having cavitation through those generators, and it'll just tear things apart. Those lower tubes are the river outlet tubes. Those things can be used to drain water or to release water, but they're not designed to operate all the time. And as you keep getting lower and lower ahead, you're able to move less and less water through until, at some point, if things continued, you would get to the bottom inlets on those river outlet tubes, and you would basically be able to release only as much water as is coming into the reservoir on the upper end, which is generally considered by the lower basin much less than what they need. That's what we were dealing with in the spring of 2022 with that reservoir. And we started, reclamation began what it called the supplemental environmental impact statement to the 2007 coordinated operating agreement or guidelines. And we started thinking about all the things that we might do to reduce releases and otherwise prop up Lake Powell. Then, well, you lived through last year's winter. This is a graph that shows the snowfall, the water equivalent, snow water equivalent of that happened last year. The black line shows the median for upper basin snowfall. The red line shows what happened the previous winter, winter 21-22. And you can see that the winter started last year it started just like the previous year. But then in 21, the snowfall just basically stopped and for quite a while. And so we ended up with much less than the median. Last year, it just kept going. And we ended up with, at its peak, about over 160% of the median. A huge amount of water, and it really took we got a reprieve is what we got. We got snow and precipitation, and Congress rained money on us. They, and Tanya can talk more about that. She was trying to make that water available to the states. But there was a huge amount of money to start trying to figure out this problem with as well. So we essentially got a reprieve. And let me talk briefly about the, I mentioned that Reclamation had started a supplemental EIS. And they asked the states, as they often do, they asked us to come up with a consensus alternative because they don't want the states arguing about what they end up doing. So if they can get us all to agree on a consensus going into this, it's much better for everyone. We worked really hard at trying to get a consensus alternative. We were not able to get that. We ended up with 6 states agreeing to a 6-state consensus, and California on its own taking a different tack. Both of those alternatives recognize that the lower basin had to reduce uses dramatically. The 6-state alternative would simply have, it would have dealt with those shortages kind of proportionally across the board based on uses, at least the shortage that's attributable to evaporation and system losses in those lower basin levels, lower basin reservoirs. That's not accounted for today. And it needs to be. That's a huge amount. We've estimated anywhere from about 1.2 to 1.5 million acre feet evaporates and is lost out of that system. And they act as if it doesn't happen. They act as if their physics doesn't happen below Lee Ferry. So anyway, we have these 2 alternatives that are going into this, and then we had this reprieve of a lot of snowfall, a lot of money, and the lower basin came up with a different plan. They said, well, rather than imposing these cuts on everybody, what if we try and do compensated system conservation in the lower basin primarily? They wanted the upper basin to do some as well, but that's where the effort needed to really focus in the lower basin. And they said, we will pledge to conserve up to 3 million acre feet between now and 2026. We'll do it early, and given the new snowfall and everything else, that should take care of us. The upper basin agreed that Reclamation should analyze that plan. And in fact, Reclamation pulled back the original draft SEIS that was there. They did this analysis, and just recently they reissued the draft SEIS, where now they are focused solely on that lower basin plan. They pulled back on those other 2 alternatives. They've been analyzed, but no longer considered. And I think that's the path we're on. And the lower basin, for its part, they have entered into contracts to conserve very large amounts of water. The largest user is still in negotiations, and those actually have to go through NEPA and CEQA in California. They have to do analyses, environmental impact analyses about if they actually start reducing those. And so the timing of this is going to be tricky, but nevertheless, we've got a path forward right now. And we were really bailed out by Mother Nature in terms of the hydrology. But the other thing that's going on is the 2007 guidelines expire in 2026. They were agreed to in 2007 for 20 years. They expire in 2026. So concurrently, Reclamation has just issued an EIS for us to try and come up with a new set of operational guidelines going forward. And that's our current effort. I'm going to focus the rest of this discussion really on kind of what the differences are between the upper basin and the lower basin, and what some of New Mexico's interests are as we go into those negotiations. And I'm able to see the screen over here, but not quite be able to read it. So I'll try and remember what it says. The key differences between the upper basin and the lower basin. I mentioned the two reservoirs that are huge, Lakes Powell and Meade. Those are at the bottom end of the lower basin, of the upper basin. We don't get the benefit of those. Our water users don't get the benefit of those. We are generally dependent on the hydrology that we get on each of the little tributary systems. There are a few reservoirs. I mentioned Flaming Gorge, Aspinall, Navajo, but they're not, they don't supply many of our water users. So we get our water, and it's dependent primarily on what is available in the tributaries that feed those particular uses. The lower basin has a much more secure, it's got a completely secure supply as far as they've been, historically they've had a completely secure supply. They simply release more water out of Lake Powell, send it down to Lake Meade, and then send it out to their users. Another key difference, the upper basin has hundreds, if not thousands, of individual diversions to get our water uses. So it's really hard to administer that. The lower basin, because they deliver at these major delivery points below Lake Meade, there's tens of diversions, and Reclamation operates most of those. So it's much easier for them to operate and administer that water. Let's see. I mentioned the upper basin accounts for all its water uses, including system losses and evaporation. We bear the evaporation in those upstream reservoirs. We bear the evaporation in Lake Powell. The lower basin does not account for any of that evaporation or system losses. They got 7.5 million acre feet on the main stem, and that's how much is delivered to them at the river turnouts, as if there's no reduction for that evaporation. Only in the last few years have they actually acknowledged, they often term that as a structural deficit, that's an issue, but it still hasn't been dealt with. That's one of the things that we think needs to be dealt with. I think that probably says enough about that. Let me, while I've got this map though up on the screen, you'll notice on this map, this actually does show the Mexico portion of the basin. And it also shows some shaded areas outside of the basin that from the compact perspective are considered part of the Colorado River system. Those are areas that get water from the Colorado River system through trans-basin diversions. So you'll notice along the Rio Grande, there's one of those shaded areas. That represents San Juan Chamo water that's coming into the Rio Grande system and is benefiting users in the Rio Grande system. You'll see the same over in California around LA. LA gets a lot of its water supply, and San Diego, the LA metro area, gets a lot of its water supply from and then you see that in Utah and other places as well. So let me talk a little bit about water uses in New Mexico. I mentioned if we had the 7.5 million acre feet to work with, our apportionment would be on the order of 840,000 acre feet per year. In fact, we're using about 410,000 acre feet per year, primarily because it's not there. We have projected demands into the future, into 2070, and we have demands that we expect are going to be larger. And a good part of that is implementation of Indian water rights settlements. While we've settled most of our Indian tribal claims on the San Juan Basin, not all of those water demands have been yet put to use. I want to point out while on this screen, I've been talking almost exclusively of New Mexico and its upper basin interests. We do have some interest in the lower basin. We have water water that we use from the Little Colorado River and the Gila, San Francisco, San Simon rivers down in the Silver City area, but those are really small and they're governed by court decrees. And our negotiating position on the Colorado River is from an upper basin perspective. This is a map that shows kind of the Navajo Gallup project and major infrastructure in the project. I'm going to go by this because Rolf is going to talk about this later. Similarly, this shows water uses in the basin, and Rolf is going to talk about this as well. I think Rolf is going to talk about this, but I'm going to mention it anyway. This shows just reductions to the San Juan Chama project. Up until about 2012, San Juan Chama project got 100% of its supply almost every single year. Then in 2012, they started getting shorted. And you'll see in 2021, they took something like a 35% reduction. I think in 2022, I think it was higher than that, close to 40%. So Albuquerque and Santa Fe that have become increasingly reliant on San Juan Chama water, that water is less and less reliable. And if you think about climate change, it's probably going to continue that way. And the San Juan Chama project is one of the junior users on the system. So we'd be wise to think about how we deal with that effectively. So I've mentioned a lot of the complications I've mentioned a lot of the differences between the upper basin and the lower basin and how that's going to complicate the discussions between the upper basin and the lower basin. One complication that I haven't really talked about yet is, the tribes. There's 30 tribes in the basin, and this map shows where all of those tribes are. There's 6 of those tribes in the upper basin, and most of those have had at least quantified water rights from the states and the feds to them, but they haven't been fully developed. It's a mixed bag in the lower basin, and historically, those tribes had not been at the table, even though arguably they have a very significant percentage of the water in the Colorado River. They had not been consulted with about the management of the river. They have increasingly demanded that they must be at the river. And there is good work engaging the tribes, and they are being really helpful in terms of managing this river. I want to be clear about that. But they also want to have their say in how the river is managed. That, from a negotiation perspective, it's hard enough with 7 parties at the table. Now, if you bring in 30 tribes and the US, there's a 38 sovereigns convening that's going on. And then you have all of their advisors, and boy, it gets pretty unwieldy. But we're trying to figure out how to deal with that. This slide is, I just wanted to show the difference between 1922 and 2022 when we celebrated the 100-year anniversary. 1922, we had a very distinguished white gentleman that signed the compact. There was no representation by the tribes. It was not a very diverse group. You look at the group in the bottom that was in the photo last year. There was representatives from, I don't know, maybe 10 tribes there. Tanya's in there as Assistant Secretary for the Water and Science. We have Mexican representatives in that photo. You'll notice also, half of the people in there are women, just as there are out in the crowd. That's a relatively recent development, and I applaud you. So it makes things difficult to add more parties, but I think it's imperative that we have those voices at the table and that we find ways to deal with those interests. And that's where I'll stop and give Tanya a chance to correct me.
I think, thank you. And I think what I'd like to do is just amplify a few points. How much time do we have left? 5 minutes? Okay. I'm going to amplify just a few points, and you go backwards this way. And just highlight a few things to mention in thinking about the complexities of this river system from a New Mexico perspective. Oops. Okay. So Esteban mentioned that, the security of the supply for the Colorado River Basin and in particular with respect to the San Juan Chama project. We'll hear more about that from the contractors directly. But that same dynamic is at play with respect to some of the other major contractors in the basin. And if you just focus on the lower basin states for a moment and think about those states of California, Arizona, and Nevada. So state of California has 4.4 million acre feet allocation. Arizona has 2.8 million acre feet, and Nevada has 300,000 allocation of Colorado River water. That stems back to originally the 1922 compact. Then Congress interpreted the compact with respect to the lower basin states in 1928 and allocated among the states. But in addition to that, the lower basin states couldn't agree on every issue for that allocation, so there was Supreme Court litigation that lasted for several years, and in 1964, a U.S. Supreme Court case determined an additional layer of allocation requirements for those lower basin states and imposed requirements on the Secretary of the Interior for accounting for all of those lower basin uses. And that legal framework is again part of the framework that we're moving forward with in these negotiations between the upper basin and the lower basin. And I'll just point out back to that security issue. Colorado River supplies are a major source of supply for cities like Los Angeles and San Diego. Actually, that region in Southern California represents 20 million of the 40 million that are that utilize the Colorado River throughout all of the 7 basin states and in Mexico. So a very significant interest in trying to think about the future of the river from their perspective. Kind of a similar circumstance with respect to Arizona. The Central Arizona Project was authorized in 1968, the same time as the San Juan Chama Project, and that supply of imported water to communities, the major communities and significant tribal communities in Arizona is a key influence of how they're approaching the upcoming negotiations and thinking about their water security and their future. And maybe just to highlight with respect to our very important partners in Mexico, and Esteban and I have both participated in negotiations with the delegation from Mexico over several years, and we've been able to build a relationship with them that truly demonstrates a shared sense of interest and responsibility for the water users that rely on the Colorado River Basin and its complicated because the Department of State has an entity called the International Boundary Water Commission. I know we deal with them here in New Mexico on the Rio Grande as well. But the International Boundary Water Commission has a U.S. component and a parallel agency from Mexico that negotiates these issues with respect to how to interpret a treaty dating back to 1944 that specifies the delivery requirements on the Colorado from the U.S. to Mexico, and then on the Rio Grande from Mexico to the U.S. And just another element of a key partnership, but also a key complexity. I am maybe just want to highlight the last slide.
Before you move off
Yep.
Before she moves off of that, I want to.
Here. Come on up.
We're being told we have 1 minute, but what I wanted to point out, and I couldn't read it before, on that slide at the bottom, I point out how much is being used in the upper basin, lower basin today. The lower basin, including Mexico, gets consistently 9 million acre feet. 7.5 million for the lower basin states, plus 1.5 million for Mexico. In the last year or so, they've been cut a little bit because of the drought contingency plans. The upper basin combined, about 4.5 million. So, one other thing, the economies, and Tanya mentioned this, the economies, there's no comparison. The economy in California and Arizona and Nevada, very, very robust. That's not the case in the upper basin because we haven't had to secure water.
And so I think just to wrap us up and think about those principles, we've laid out some of the issues that are literally on the table today. We have a foundation of agreements and experience that will help guide us into the future. We have resources now at funding at unprecedented levels, both from the federal perspective, from many, many agencies, and from even our state resources here in New Mexico to be thinking about how to position ourselves with respect to these next round of negotiations. And I think it's delightful that we have the modern day version of the story to be working from that does include representation from tribes in the basin, from women, and from communities that are very diverse. So as I started with, I really want to encourage us all to be thinking about how to contribute to these efforts and really how to ensure that we will have the next generation of workforces and lawyers and engineers and thoughtful folks that can help guide us as we move ahead. So thanks again for having us, and looking forward to the rest of the presentations.
And we do have a few minutes for questions. If anyone has one, please raise your hand and one of our microphone runners will come and find you.
John Hawley here. Do you have any idea, or do you foresee any movement or any change in the future to start managing reservoirs to, instead of putting water out to dry in reservoirs, to maintain in-stream flows throughout the Colorado River system and the Rio Grande? This is a big recreation interests are going to be a big player in this, but someone's got to give in the future.
There is, without a doubt, there is a strong recreational component, strong kind of species component into how the river is managed, and minimal flows are part of that management operation. But in order to meet those minimal flows, you need water in reservoirs. Otherwise, sometimes you will dry up the river. I think there's a question over here also.
Thank you. Esteban, you mentioned in your comments about alternative approaches. California was a little different than the other 6 states, and I thought I heard you use the word compensated conservation. Was that correct? Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
But when I talked about the difference between California's approach and the other 6 states initially, the difference was there was a recognition by everyone that there needed to be shortages that reflected the evaporation and system losses. Arizona insisted that those could be applied, but they should be protected by their seniority on the system. The other states wanted those shortages to be just allocated pro rata with their uses. Later, in the later iteration of the SCIS, there is a proposal, and it's actually playing out. They have proposed voluntary system conservation compensated by the federal government or by other entities, and that's what's playing out right now. There was something like $4 billion that was made available to, well, Tanya knows the specifics of the dollar amounts, to the states to do this. The Upper Basin also had a compensated system conservation program. We had, ours was not, we did not conserve a lot of water, but we had a significant amount of interest.
Hello? Over here on the other side. I had a question about the operating guidelines. Given like how many layers of different compacts and agreements, I'm curious just what, with these replacements to the 2007 guidelines, like what exact decisions are going to be made in there, kind of versus all the other stacks of laws and compacts before it?
You bring up an interesting point. We talk often about not only the compacts, but the law of the river. There's so many different layers of law that drive these things. These operating guidelines, at least the way it's laid out, it is simply to figure out how we operate Lakes Mead and Powell. That is, how much we release out of Lake Powell to send down to Lake Mead, and how much is released out of Lake Mead. That's ostensibly what it's supposed to be. There are many players that will weigh in this process that want us to take a much broader look. But we're, at least from an Upper Basin perspective, that's kind of how we're focusing on this right now. The operation, how much we release out of Lake Powell under certain conditions, how much can be taken by the Lower Basin out of Lake Mead.
And can I add,
Absolutely.
from a technically a lawyer perspective, so the guidelines build off of a 1968 statute that required the development of long-term operating criteria. And so those criteria existed, but the additional layer of coordinated operations guidelines, and the emphasis was interim guidelines on coordinated operations of Lake Powell and Lake Mead, and rules for specific lower basin shortage sharing. And so for the past 20 years or 18 years, we've been building off of the experience of those 2007 agreements and thinking about both of those components. What are the additional layers of agreement that can encourage more conservation in the lower basin? And a great example was the 2019 Drought Contingency Plan agreements that included and required additional layers of conservation from the lower basin and emphasized additional coordination between the upper basin and the lower basin, and developed new tools like storage in Lake Powell for upper basin conservation, if and when that was going to come together. So these are all very iterative issues, and as we're kicking off the next round, we'll see how that develops in terms of the breadth of additional components we might want to be thinking about.
All right, and this is going to be our last question.
Thank you. Larry Reagan, New Mexico Farm and Livestock Bureau. I just wanted to make sure I understood. This last year, New Mexico got the Upper Basin got 4.5 million acre feet.
Last year we got less than that, I believe. That 4.5 million is the median of what we've been getting over several
Okay.
years.
And then New Mexico gets 11.25% of that?
Yeah, well, it's not exactly that, but I think New Mexico has been getting over the last few years about 410,000 acre feet, and I think Rolf is going to address that more specifically a little later.
Okay. And will he talk about how much of that is used for farming?
Yes,
Okay, thank
he
you.
will. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Tanya and Esteban. My name is Mark Sheely. I'm a program specialist at the New Mexico Water Resources Research Institute. I'm sure many of you attending this meeting or some of our recent conferences have received plenty of emails from me regarding our events. Our next presenter I'd like to welcome to the stage is Kyle Harwood. Kyle is an attorney and water resources professional, as well as partner at Eagle, Furlick, Martinez, and Harwood. Kyle has advised clients on land and water law regulation and policy issues, and he litigates these issues in courts throughout the state. Kyle's home is an historic ranch in La Cienega outside Santa Fe, where he raises his three young sons with his wife. Kyle, thank you so much for presenting, and welcome to the stage.
The lights are really bright up here, if you don't know. Great. Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to see old friends in the audience and also so many new faces. I was talking with Sam earlier. I think we have a lot of students in the room today, which is great. I fondly remember being a student. I guess by way of a little bit of background, I did the master's degree in water resources here at UNM before going to law school, which was just a wonderful introduction to water resource management, and combined that with the law practice that I have now. And of course, lawyers like to joke, it's a good thing it's called a practice because you're always learning how to do it. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the history and the impacts of the San Juan Chama Contractors Association. I'll also talk a little bit about how San Juan Chama water has been used in New Mexico. My challenge is to try to make water managers and bureaucrats talking to each other interesting for you, which is not inherently interesting, but for those of you who don't know what the San Juan Chama project is, it is the most interesting, coolest, project we have in New Mexico. And I'm going to try to convince you of that over the course of the next couple of minutes. What's really nice about today's presentation, and I was complimenting Sam on this earlier, is that we have the macro presentation that Esteban and Tanya just provided, really looking at the Colorado River system as a whole, and the kinds of volume numbers that Tanya and Esteban were just talking about, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acre feet, millions of acre feet. Well, we're going to bring it down to a New Mexico scale, as many of you probably appreciate if you are living and working and studying here. We're going to be talking about 96,200 acre feet, which is the current projected firm yield of the project, and how that water is shared among a diverse group of approximately 20 contractors, from Heron up by Chama, New Mexico, down through to the confluence with the Rio Grande. There are a number of contractors up in the Taos area, and then down through the Middle Valley. So with that, I did not get a training. Oh, and I'm also going to note that after my presentation, Carolyn is going to correct everything that I say wrong, which will be great. And then there are some really wonderful other presentations later in the day that are more, I think, inherently exciting. So my challenge is to make coordination among water users interesting for you today. There will be a presentation here in a little bit by, first by Carolyn, and then by Rolf a little later, explaining the New Mexico portion of Colorado. Then we've got some wonderful speakers speaking on tribal issues. And then lastly, my colleagues in Santa Fe. Oh, I'm sorry. Right, I'll do that in a second. Some wonderful colleagues from Santa Fe talking about project hydrology, and then Bill Snyder will be talking about current efforts on how to use San Juan Chama water creatively in the Middle Valley. So after all that, do I hit that button, do you think? Okay. Thank you. So a little bit of the history of the San Juan Chama Contractors Association. Prior to 2019, there were a number of regular meetings that the contractors had with various entities, regulatory entities here in New Mexico. The primary one was an annual meeting between the Bureau of Reclamation and these contractors to discuss funding of repair and replacement of the project. The project, just in a nutshell, is 3 diversion dams in upper watersheds outside of Pagosa mostly in Colorado that take water off of 3 high mountain systems that get larger obviously as they go downstream. But up at that elevation, these are fairly discrete upper watersheds, and water is slowed and pooled behind fairly small dams, and then there's a hole in the side of the creek where water is encouraged to get into the tunnels. And the first one is a very important one. The second one is a very small one. And the third one is a very, very important one on the main stem of the Navajo. And as each of these tunnels approaches the next drainage, the water gets flumed under the creek, and the next creek joins it, through a Y, basic plumbing. And then after those 3, it goes crosses the state line, goes under the Continental Divide, and exits at a facility called Azotea Tunnel, which is a couple of miles upstream of Heron Reservoir. If you're not familiar with Heron, outside of Chama, it is the damming of what's called Willow Creek, and Willow Creek is dammed just as Willow Creek would join the Rio Chama. And then from there it goes through El Vado and Abiquiu, down past Santa Fe and Los Alamos, down into Cochiti, and then down here into the Middle Valley. So with a little bit of that background, that's a bunch of what we call gray infrastructure, the Bureau's concrete. And as we know, the Bureau really likes neat and tidy concrete, and so do we. Because in order for it to function properly, it needs to be maintained. So that annual meeting prior to 2019 was the Bureau explaining to the contractors what their portion of the expenses would be for maintaining that gray concrete. And there were also the regular, and I think many of you here in the room are aware that there's a regular Rio Grande annual operating plan meeting that the Bureau hosts, and that's where the Bureau explains to everyone who's interested, and I encourage you to go to this meeting, it's a fascinating conversation, about runoff projections, storage status, release schedules, one of my favorite topics, rafting releases for the wild and scenic stretch of the Rio Chama, and then the status of various facility repairs. Contractors were also encouraged by the city of Albuquerque and then subsequently Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority to a selection of ad hoc meetings. My history with this goes back to the late 90s, and particularly John Stomp at the time convened the contractors for various topics. And so this loose collection of folks was meeting through these various discussions. Many of you may be aware of what we affectionately call as the Minnow Wars, mostly the late 90s and early 2000s, and that resulted in the rather long acronym, Middle Rio Grande Endangered Species Act Collaborative Program. So there's a lot of coordination between San Juan Chama contractors and their various projects, Rio Grande Compact Commission meetings, and then various Law of the Rio Grande and New Mexico Water Law CLE conferences, and this sort of conference as well. So prior to 2019, you had a lot of informal coordination, cooperation, a lot of people who know each other who would talk about the various challenges facing the San Juan Chama project. And so then what we get in 2019 is an initiative by now State Engineer Mike Hammond. He was then the CEO of the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, and Engineer Stomp, who is now Attorney Stomp, excuse me, who was at the time the Chief Operating Officer of the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority. And they encouraged a regular meeting schedule open to all San Juan Chama contractors to review and respond to these increasing, frankly, rapidly increasing OMR&R costs for maintaining the project. And by rapidly increasing, as you may know, the project just turned 50, and water projects, when they turn 50, need more and more attention and love. And of course, this project, as I've already explained, is such a cool project, it obviously justifies all that attention and love. So these costs were increasing, and the initiative by Mike and John was to really try to create a opportunity for the contractors to coordinate amongst themselves. It's a very diverse group of contractors. There are irrigation districts, there are cities, there are counties, there are several tribal entities, and water is used for, the San Juan Chama water is used for a number of different purposes. And so it's a really diverse group of water users in New Mexico, kind of represents the diversity of our state. And in this way that they each have San Juan Chama contracts, they're also working together for a common purpose, which is to really the care and feeding of this critical project. So as a result of the 2019 initiative, we made more formal requests to the Bureau of Reclamation Albuquerque area office, and under Jen Failer's leadership, it has been a really wonderful working experience working with Carolyn and many of her colleagues here at the Albuquerque office to understand how this project's going to continue to supply critical water and in a way that works for all of us. So that was the 2019 initiative. This is what the association is now sort of doing. There's the regular cost reimbursement discussions have become a series of 3 meetings a year between the contractors and the Bureau. Our main focus is on a report that used to be called the FRP, the Facility Rehab Plan. It's now been renamed because, you know, renaming reports is part of what happens. It's now called the MR&R report, Maintenance, Repair, and Replacement Report. And this is what details the out-year construction needs for maintaining the project. There's a active smaller group that works on what we call the MOA 2 effort. MOA 2 really doesn't mean anything, but it is the MOA, Memorandum of Agreement, concerning the Upper Colorado River Basin Fund. This is New Mexico's share of power revenues from dams on the Colorado, and that funds a number of critical infrastructure improvements. There's a limited number of projects that are eligible for using that money. And then what is probably, I would say arguably the most fun is the scheduling and hosting of an annual workshop and field trip. So We've did 2 years at the Chama field office and visiting the Azotea outfall and the 3 diversions up in Colorado, and took a break there during COVID. Then in 2022, we hosted an event in Santa Fe where we reviewed, oh good, I said his name and he appeared. Hello, state engineer. And then most recently we went to Pagosa Springs and really took a hard look at the upper watershed and fire mitigation issues up there. So it's been a really great way to educate really everybody. We get good participation from all the agencies, including the feds and the state, and then all the water managers that are involved with the various contractor entities. So this has been the primary work of the Contractors Association in terms of meetings and events. These are the initiatives of the Contractors Association we completed with Bureau's help. Access to the facilities to do our own asset management plan, which was a very important effort to understand the condition of the project. That was conducted through the Utility Authority and one of their nationally recognized consulting engineers, Hayes and Sawyer, which was a great experience. We're continuing to sort of understand how that asset management plan will inform repair and replacement and optimization efforts going forward. We've worked with the Bureau staff, some of Carolyn Donnelly's colleagues, on understanding how sediment gets moved through these 3 tributaries. And sediment management is a huge issue for this project, has been from the beginning, and will surely continue to be so. The main focus of late has been understanding how to manage not if a fire happens above these 3 watersheds, but when a fire happens. And that's part of realizing the general increasing temperatures and other trends that particularly Esteban just mentioned. These 3 watersheds are partially federal land. One of them is a 54,000 acre privately owned ranch, which looks like a national park, frankly. Pretty incredible country up there, but there's a lot of patchwork of ownership, a lot of fire risk, a lot of standing dead trees right now at the very, very high elevations. And so, you know, I think there will be a day when we get a phone call from Pagosa that says there's a fire in the watershed. And so we're trying to build the capacity now to make sure we understand how best to support that. So it's pre-fire planning, it's fire, management and communication, and then probably the most important and the most expensive part is post-fire mitigation. And funding fire treatment is something that many of the contractors are getting more involved with. We've established really good connections with professionals in Pagosa to support the efforts to mitigate fire above the 3 diversions. And that seems to be a very prudent concern to have. You've already heard a lot about Colorado River operations from Tanya and Esteban. We enjoy a good working relationship with the UCRC. Esteban's the New Mexico rep to that. There's a lot that happens at the annual meeting in Las Vegas, Nevada with the Colorado River Water Users Association, the CRUA meeting, and then some of the environmental studies and operations development that Tanya and Esteban mentioned, various guidelines for Colorado River operations that they've already discussed in some detail. And then, a very exciting development that I think some of you know about is the lease between the Interstate Stream Commission, Hickory Apache Nation, and facilitated by TNC. And that's leasing, so Hickory Apache Nation has a contract, actually the 3rd largest contract on the San Juan Chama project, but it also has substantial recognized water rights on the San Juan River. And so this is a collaborative approach to, and SWR refers to Strategic Water Reserve there. So this is actively managing Hickory's San Juan River allocation for compact and species needs, and that's a very exciting development on the San Juan River. So that's a little of the history and impacts of the San Juan Chama Contractors Association. I will just talk a little, for one more minute, about the impact of the San Juan Chama project generally. It's been used to, obviously been used to develop water supply projects, particularly in Albuquerque and Santa Fe. It's been used to supplement irrigation demands by MRGCD. It gets used for all sorts of surface and groundwater offset permitting. So this is both pumping of groundwater and keeping the river whole by accounting for that, the surface water effects of that groundwater pumping by release of San Juan Chama water. Also surface water depletion accounting. So the example for that is Pewaukee Valley Irrigation District, where I think some of you went on the field trip yesterday. They're off-channel storage project, and so the depletion effects of storing that water are accounted for by the release of San Juan Chama water. And then critically, particularly after the minnow wars of the late 90s and early 2000s, San Juan Chama water has been used for supplemental water supply to support endangered species. And for those of you who don't know, we're about to have a number of new listings in the Middle Valley and the Rio Grande generally. A couple of new fish, a mouse, and a flower. And so that will be an interesting new chapter for ESA management in the Rio Grande. And I suspect San Juan Chama water will be playing a key role in helping New Mexico generally stay compliant with the Endangered Species Act. So with that, I see I'm at 10:25, so I'll, I guess, ask if there are any questions. Is that my job? I don't know, where did I can't see anybody out there. Oh, there you are. No time. John Hawley does not want me to talk anymore. Okay, and that's fine.
If you have a question, could you just raise your hand?
Great. Carolyn will be taking lots of questions. All right, with that, thank you very much. It's wonderful to see everybody.
And I'll just give Carolyn Donnelly a quick introduction here. She is a supervisory civil engineer for the Bureau of Reclamation in Albuquerque. Ms. Donnelly holds a Bachelor and Master of Science degrees in civil engineering from the University of New Mexico. She began as a consulting engineer and then began working for Reclamation in 2006. In 2010, she moved from river analysis and design to water operations. She's now responsible for water operations on 3 reclamation projects: San Juan Chama, Middle Rio Grande, and Carlsbad, and has duties related to the Rio Grande project. She is a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Mexico and spends much of her time outside of work exploring wild places. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Mark. Let's see. I think hopefully that I will flesh out some of what Kyle and the previous speakers have all referred to, and I'm sure maybe through the repetition, we're touching on different aspects, but all the same things. Maybe some of it will sink in. So yeah, again, my name is Carolyn Donnelly. Welcome, everybody, and thank you. I'm going to start in with, here's a map of the San Juan Chama project, and you can see that, and the inset map on the right shows Nambe Falls Dam, which we've heard mentioned, and that's part of the San Juan Chama project. I'll speak a little bit more about that later. And again, I think that Esteban or Tanya mentioned that the San Juan Chama project is part of New Mexico's share of the Colorado River Basin flow from the Upper Colorado River Compact, although it does not come anywhere close to the 11.25%. It moves water from Colorado, southwestern Colorado, through those diversion dams, the small pools that Kyle mentioned, into tunnels that take it into Heron Reservoir. And let's see, so it was authorized by Congress. There were Reclamation and others were thinking about the project long before 1962, but it was finally authorized in 1962. The Trans-Basin facilities, that's the tunnels and Heron Dam, were completed in 1971. Nambe Falls Dam construction in 1976. The Trans-Basin facilities are operated and maintained by Reclamation. That's not true for Nambe Falls Dam. The Poake Valley Irrigation District operates and maintains that facility. And again, the parts of the project so there were 4 tributary units planned when people started thinking about the San Juan Chama project. There were a couple units up by Taos, and then also one near Velarde. The only of the tributary units is the Poake tributary unit, which is Nambe Falls Dam. And so the project works that were actually constructed are the 3 diversion dams, the tunnels, Heron Reservoir, and then Nambe Falls Reservoir. And San Juan Chama project supplies water for municipal, industrial, domestic, all those uses, including supplemental water for irrigation. Here's a little bit closer, a little bit more scaled map so you can see the tunnels. As Kyle mentioned, the most upstream diversion is Blanco Diversion Dam. That's on the Rio Blanco. And I don't know why we use the word Oso instead of Navajo, but Little Oso is on the Little Navajo River, and then Oso is on the Navajo River. And then those tunnels, again, outlet into Azotea Tunnel, and then there's an outfall with a stream gauge there, and that's the official determination of the San Juan Chama water diverted. About almost 27 miles of tunnel through the Continental Divide, and then below the Azotea Tunnel outfall, almost 12 miles of open channel. And then that takes us to Heron Reservoir. However, we'll stop here. And there are also some constraints that are important to the project. You can see in the little table the capacity of the various tunnels. So if we were diverting the maximum amount that we could, 520 CFS into the Blanco Tunnel, then we would not be able to divert the full amount into the at Little Oso Diversion Dam, because that would exceed the capacity of the tunnel below that. I will say in recent years, Little Oso or the Little Navajo River has not contributed a lot of flow to the project. So most of the flow, as Kyle alluded to, comes from the Navajo River, which has that private ranch upstream, and then Blanco, the Rio Blanco. And Azotea Tunnel, we do see sometimes at the outfall up to 1,000 CFS, but the official channel capacity or tunnel capacity is 950. We do have some requirements that were set in what's called the San Juan Chama Green Book. So this, when Congress authorized the project, they told Reclamation to go write some guidelines for it. And so in that document, we set out minimum bypass requirements for fish and wildlife, and also to meet downstream water rights. We set those for the Rio Blanco and the Navajo River. We didn't set any kind of requirements for the Little Navajo River. And before we can divert, so right now we're not diverting at any of these because the flow coming to the diversion dam is only, say, for the Rio Blanco, it's November, it's less than 20 CFS, so we have to bypass that to meet the minimum bypass requirement. And so it's only when we meet that bypass requirement that we can begin to divert. And in addition, the legislation said that in any consecutive 10-year period, we can only divert 1.35 million acre feet. And in a single year, we can only divert 270,000 acre feet, and we have not ever gotten close to that. So we're safe on those, on that. And I think Kyle referred to the sediment inflow, so there is a significant amount of sediment that comes to the diversions on the tributaries. They were all designed to sluice sediment, and so that's how project operations began. But then in 1977, Reclamation was sued because a downstream party who had, I believe, a trout pond and they didn't like the sediment coming in. And so the judgment, one of the parts of the judgment said that we were operating the facilities so there was no impairment to flows, but the sediment was impairing or injuring people. And so as a result of that, the Reclamation's regional director decided that we would no longer use the sluiceways. Instead, we would mechanically remove the sediment. And so every year in the fall, diversions are generally shut down, and our Chama Field Division goes out and removes sediment with dozers and backhoes and all sorts of heavy equipment. And that is also where the minimum bypass flows for the Little Navajo came from, was that the regional director set them as a result of that. And you probably heard Kyle mention the firm yield. I myself have gotten away from using that term. So firm yield is supposed to indicate the volume that we believe every year will supply. Since 2013, we've seen that we're not getting that volume every year. So I personally am now just saying annual allocation. But I'll give you a little bit of history. So the first studies we did in what Reclamation does, a definite plan report to start planning out future projects, used the period of 1936 to 1945. And they found a divertible volume of just under 129,000 acre feet. Then later they did a restudy that went from 1936 to 1957, and that the 1950s, probably most of you know, were much drier, so that reduced the divertible volume to 110,500 acre feet. But then due to some physical constraints, the 1964 definite plan report settled on a firm yield of 101,800 acre feet. And then in 1986, Reclamation did another restudy, which included years from 1936 to 1984, and that found a firm yield of 94,200. But then Reclamation made some accounting changes and found that the firm yield was 96,200 acre feet. And so that is the published, and that's the current firm yield that we use. We then did another restudy in 1999, and it found a slightly higher firm yield, but then we decided, because of the accounting changes that had been used to increase the firm yield in that study in the 1980s, we stuck with the 96,200. So that is currently our firm yield, but really I'd say that's our annual allocation. All right, and speaking of allocations, this is a little table from URGWAM that shows the allocations to the various contractors. There are 20 San Juan Chama contractors. For some years, not all of the water was contracted, but now all of it is, so there's no additional water to use for any other purposes. So what happens when there's water diverted at the upstream diversions, it flows into Heron, and when it gets to Heron, it is held, we have water accounts, and all of those contractors have water accounts in Heron. There's also a water account that we call the federal pool. So any San Juan Chama inflow is held in the federal pool, and then we allocate that water to the contractors in a given year. They each get an annual allocation, and they have a year to move it out of Heron, although you'll see in the next, or a few slides further, that there's some caveats to that. And the 20 contractors include 5 that are either fully or partially go to tribes or pueblos. And then since 2013, we've seen shortages, and those are applied proportionally to all the contractors in proportion to their allocation. And the allocation procedures, all of the water contracts say that the shortage will be shared equally or proportionally between contractors, but we did not have a procedure for actually doing that. So in 2013, we had to develop that. And so what we determined was that we'll make an initial allocation on January 1st of a given year based on the previous day's content of the federal pool, so the unallocated water in Heron. And if that is not a full allocation, then we won't make another allocation until April. And then after April, we make monthly allocations, either through the end of the calendar year or until there's a full allocation made. And that's, we always hold back water for the dead pool, which is fairly small, and then estimated evaporation. And the reason that we don't make allocations in February or March is because typically there's no inflow. It's too cold up there to get any inflow. So there's no water to allocate. It will not have changed much since January 1st. And then on that April and usually May and June, we don't have to hold back much, if any, for evaporation because we know the next month we'll have inflow, and so some of that water can be used to cover evaporation. But then later in the year, if we're still making allocations in the fall, then we'll have to hold back for dead pool. And so then the waivers, so reclamation can provide waivers to contractors. That allows them to keep their water in Heron until September 30th of the year following allocation. So those are based on there being a benefit to the government, and often that is that they lease water to reclamation for our supplemental water program to benefit endangered species here in the Middle Rio Grande. We've also, there were questions about recreational use of the rivers. So we work really hard, and we have great partners with the municipalities, with Albuquerque and Santa Fe, and they're the most important because they have larger allocations. But MRGCD helps us to be able to have water that we can re-regulate without releasing to the diversion. So we can release it a little earlier than might otherwise be done from Heron or from El Vado, and then stop it at Abiquiu, but that allows rafters to use it on the weekends for recreation. And then we also work with those entities to help with winter flows on the Rio Chama to help with the brown trout. And the reason that there's a benefit to the contractors is because their allocation is measured at the Heron Outlet Works. So if they're allocated 100, it doesn't suffer evaporation while it's in Heron. So they don't lose water to evaporation if it stays there longer. And if there's no waiver, then the water has to be released by December 31st in the year that it was allocated. The water leases, so there are water leases, there are several types of water leases. So again, some contractors lease their water to reclamation to use for endangered species purposes. And that helps us with compliance with our 2016 biological opinion. There are also third-party leases, so some of those are to either farmers who don't have some other water right, or else to people like contractors who may pump water from an MRGCD canal and then use that for dust abatement or some other sort of construction use. The state will then tell us that there's been a depletion to the Rio Grande of X amount, and the state sees these third-party contracts, and then they tell us, well, based on this contractor leasing from this municipality, then you need to release a certain amount of water to go to Elephant Butte or to give to MRGCD based on their depletion. This is typical Heron operations, but I will add it's typical Heron operations when El Vado is not under construction as it is currently. From January till the April, which is about when the runoff may start, there's usually no release. Sometimes there may be a small release. So Heron, the congressional authorization and remaining in compliance with the Rio Grande Compact, Heron is not allowed to store native water, but it's not practical to release every drop of native water as it comes in. So sometimes we retain a little bit of native water until there's enough to release in an efficient manner, and then we release it. So that may be what's released at that time. May to September, we begin to get runoff, so we may be releasing native water that's come in that time period. And we're also going to be releasing sometimes reclamation's leased supplemental water, and then also water for MRGCD if they don't have enough native supply or Rio Grande water to irrigate with. And then later in that period, we move the water that's been waivered. So that's typically the municipalities, Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and some of the smaller contractors. we'll move that downstream before September 30th. So that period of August, September often has a higher consistent flow. We do the weekend rafting releases up to, because our supply has been shorter in the recent, or smaller in the most recent years, it's now more like 500 CFS for weekend rafting flows, not 600, but we'll go up on weekends and holidays. And then in October to December, we may be moving out water that is not waivered and moving that to another place. We're also, Cochiti, hopefully most of you know that that does not hold any water for irrigation or municipal use. What you see in Cochiti, other than this year, which is an exception in a lot of ways, is just there for recreation, and it's all San Juan Chama water. And the city of Albuquerque gave up a portion of their allocation in the 1970s or 80s to Cochiti to replace the evaporation. So that's the Cochiti recreation pool water. And we release that to keep Cochiti at a certain elevation. Just a quick slide about Nambe Falls Dam. This is the Poake tributary unit. So storage, it's a small reservoir, just under 2,000 acre feet total. Storage is divided between what we call the Indian and non-Indian irrigators. So Nambe, Pueblo, San Ildefonso, and Poake have 40% of the storage, and then Poake Valley Irrigation District provides water to a great number of acequias downstream, and they get 60% of the storage. But the majority of their irrigation occurs from what I call run of the river or natural flow. And again, Poake Valley Irrigation District operates the dam, and they coordinate the releases to all the parties. The water in storage, even though physically it's Rio Grande water, it's considered San Juan Chama project water. And Reclamation's role is doing the accounting where we're helping to determine the Indian, non-Indian storage, and then also we are determining the depletion to the Rio Grande supply and then reporting that to the Compact Commission. And then Poake Valley Irrigation District has a San Juan Chama project allocation. And so then we also release water from Heron to make up for that depletion. And Reclamation's role in a lot of things is water accounting. So San Juan Chama project, it's determining, the compact actually states this. And so New Mexico is trying to, Reclamation is trying to make sure that there is no effect on native water, no either decrease in native water showing up at Ottawa or increase as a result of San Juan Chama water being present in the system. And Ottawa is New Mexico's the measure of how much they need to deliver. So that's the upstream point. Then Elephant Butte is how much they have delivered. So San Juan Chama should not either increase or decrease their obligation to deliver water to Elephant Butte. And Reclamation does that through a model that we call URGWAM, the Upper Rio Grande Water Operations Model. We'll often refer to colors of water when we're talking with each other. So of course, all the water looks the same, but San Juan Chama, we talk about being a different color of water. So we may have a release for MRGCD, and that could be either San Juan Chama or native water. And then there's native water flowing through the system, and then Santa Fe, Albuquerque, whoever may have some water. URGWAM tracks that water. There are accounts that move all the way through the system. So we keep track of delivery, storage, sometimes there are exchanges, waivers, leases, and we track that from wherever it may have started in Heron or El Vado or wherever. We track that as it moves through the system to its destination, which could be Caballo or Elephant Butte Reservoir or even further downstream, although our accounting doesn't go downstream of Caballo. This is a view, the upper right is just a small section of the accounting view in the URGWAM model, and so the lines indicate water moving in various reaches. And URGWAM is tracking that very carefully, and then there are slots within the objects, and the object shown looks like it's El Vado. So there are slots in El Vado that track all sorts of things under different methods. And San Juan Chama has an interesting set of rules, and we keep track of all that, and we have an annual water accounting report that we present to the Compact Commission. URGWAM also has a couple of other modules. So one is what we call our annual operating plan or our forecast model. And we do that monthly in the spring to kind of get a sense of what reservoir operations and Middle Rio Grande river operations will look like that year. We use a volumetric forecast from the National Resources Conservation Service, which is not nearly as sophisticated as the forecast that the Colorado River Basin gets, but we still do a pretty good job, and we use some of our judgment to estimate a hydrograph. And so for the San Juan Chama project, and these kinds of runs will give contractors a sense of how much they may be allocated in that given year, and then that helps them to plan. And then there's also a planning module for URGWAM, and so that's used for multi-year runs. Could be 2 years, could be 100 years. We use models like that in Reclamation's basin studies and other long-term studies. And I believe, yes, that's my last slide. And this is the Azotea Tunnel outlet. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. I'm from NMSU. So, what models do you use for operations and forecasting?
URGWAM,
Oh, one. Okay.
the Upper Rio Grande Water Operations Model. It's in a riverware platform. I would say that our operations are not, so we respond to what either the contractors or MRGCD asks for. So MRGCD, if they have water in storage in El Vado, may say, release 300 today, release 400 tomorrow. We're not allocating the natural flow. That's pre-project. So we don't forecast future river operations. Like if it's June, we're not forecasting for the next week. It's really it's demand-based.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carolyn. The natural snow-fed hydrographs are shifting significantly toward earlier runoff, followed by a more extended dry period in the spring with flashier water inputs to the system. And my question is, does your infrastructure and operating rules, will they be able to accommodate that shift, or are there plans in place to change the way you do business because the water coming into the system is changing in terms of its input? Thanks.
Thanks for that question. I guess I'll have two answers for that. So from my perspective in water operations, I'm mostly dealing with what we see coming in now. So regardless of the causes, we're just trying to store it and release it as needed. But then there's another perspective of how can we improve things that may happen in the future. I'd say that our large reservoirs can handle, well, a little bit more challenging on the Pecos River, but I think on the Rio Chama and the Rio Grande, I think the large reservoirs can handle different flows, whether it's peakier volumes coming in from monsoonal rains. The San Juan Chama project, the diversion dams, we are exploring other ways of capturing some of that water. But it takes money and it takes planning and time. So one opportunity that's been discussed is to raise the height or increase the volume that we can store behind the diversion dam. So if there's a high volume, peaky summer storm, then we can, I wouldn't say retain, I wouldn't say store. We can meet the minimum bypass, slow down some of the water and divert more of it while still meeting that minimum bypass requirement. But those are tricky, long-term, difficult things, and they cost money.
Firstly, I wanted to say thank you guys for talking to us, especially us high school students. I know it's our first time here. But I was going to ask if maybe there's a lot of information, you know, so, and a lot of us are very new to these terms. I was going to see, like, if you guys could probably think about maybe, like, helping kind of summarize at the end or just making it more clear. I mean, I'm personally struggling just kind of to keep up with the information, but
I think that's
I still
fair.
really appreciate it.
No, we appreciate you guys coming, and even if you don't fully understand, you hopefully take away some of it, and maybe it piques your
No,
interest.
definitely.
I don't know how we summarize easily, but I would just say they're important projects, and for those of us here, we've spent years and years understanding, so don't feel bad if you're a little confused. You know, give yourself time, and if it's interesting, keep reading, because they are difficult and complicated, but they're important because we all drink water, you drink water, and we need that, so.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that too, because I think, yeah, some of us, or at least me, I can speak for myself, I kind of feel insecure in settings like this where it's like a lot of educated people where I'm not on that level, so I appreciate you saying that. Also, because I don't know if I'm going to ask any more questions yet, I'm just going to say I really appreciate seeing both men and women here and seeing women in science. I appreciate that. But thank you.
Yeah,
That was
no,
just my
we
question.
appreciate you coming, and we appreciate that not everybody has gray hair. We like seeing some young folks out there. So myself, I'm a civil engineer, and I see a few folks that I went to college with when I was older than they were. But in any case, I'd say civil engineering is particularly water resources is more equal gender than, say, structural or some of the other types of engineering. So if that's important to you, I think water resources is a good place to be.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Oh, I think we'll have time for maybe one more question.
Hi, this is Grace Haggerty from the ISC, and this is actually directed towards Kyle because he didn't get a question earlier. But given Carolyn's table on how many times we haven't met the firm yield in the last, 10 years or so, what is the association particularly interested in doing about that, or kind of what do your future aspirations for having these contractors get together and address the San Juan Chama project and the issues on the Colorado at the same time?
Sorry, did you get a coupon?
Does that make sense?
Did you get a coupon for a question? I don't remember. Joking. It's a great question, Grace. It is actually the hardest question and the one that looking forward is going to present the greatest challenges, but also the greatest opportunities. So what I think many speakers over the years have said is that New Mexicans are great at adapting. All of our cities and irrigation districts and tribal interests, we all appreciate living in New Mexico, and the recent variability of what I guess we used to call the firm yield and now we call the annual allocation. I'm going to have to get my dictionary out to make sure I understand all the nuances of Carolyn's non-official federal name change of that. But it's just reality, right? I mean, we all know that we are experiencing changes in precipitation. We have 52-year-old infrastructure to maintain against a really challenging backdrop, and we don't yet know what the Colorado River operations, what it'll mean necessarily for the operation of the San Juan Chama project, which is why we're so grateful to have Esteban and Tanya and of course Mike and Hannah to help track how that might influence how the project gets operated. But the recent reductions in allocations have been very real for contractors. And their costs are based on their percent of the 96,200. So they are increasingly on the hook for costs that are going up, essentially on a fixed basis, percentage-wise, but for water supplies that are not always being able to be fully allocated. So that's our challenge, and that's the challenge that the natural flow also presents. You know, we're down deep into San Juan Chama management and use, but again, it's only a small part of the natural flow that is also experiencing the same kind of phenomenon. And so that's why collaboration between New Mexicans for New Mexico is so important. And it's also why high school students coming to a conference is wonderful. The young lady who said she was insecure, I don't think I could have ever stood up at a conference like this and spoken as much as you do. So please, rely on everyone in here. Everyone in here has a smile and a handshake for anyone that's got a question. So I don't know if I totally answered all your questions, Grace, but I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Ralph has a great story of his own kind of history of 35 years of water experience, so I'm not going to read his bio, but we're just so excited to have you here, Rolf. He's retired, so he's going to tell us what he really thinks.
Thanks, Sam. See if I can get this to a place it'll work. How does that sound? Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm Rolf Schmidt-Peterson. I'm a retired water geek. And I think some of you may think after you hear me today, he's still a water geek. But I haven't been doing this for about 6 months. And one thing that I perceive from that 6-month time period is there's a real lack of information about water in New Mexico across the board. It's weird, I've been in New Mexico now for almost 40 years. And I think we talked more about water in drought 20 or 25 years ago than we do today. And when I'm in Santa Fe, I go to newcomers meetings. And everybody's there saying, well, I just came in 3 months ago or 3 years ago. And I say, well, 35 years. And they think that's a long time. And I think we all, hopefully, I think most people in this conference realize that's a really short time period in water. And really, they're very nice people, but they know nothing. So is it their responsibility to learn this stuff, or let their well go dry and then learn it? Or is there a greater need? And I think from my experience, starting for those of the high school people that are here, kind of going to Sam's piece. I mean, I got started in water in fire. I was a firefighter, and I was interested in water and fire when I was 16, 17 years old. And that's really what got me going to school and getting a bachelor's and master's degree, and then doing private consulting for environmental contamination type stuff, water quality, and then 24 years after that in water resources management. And I will say right off the bat, I'm one of the veterans of the minnow wars. I didn't think of them that way at the time. I thought it was like, wow, this is really cool to be in the midst of these battles over water and the environment and endangered species, and maybe we can find solutions, through all of that. And so to hear some of these presentations today, talking about that war, or maybe you'll be hearing about Texas v. New Mexico, which I also had a little bit of a hand in the last 15 years, 20 years. And then Colorado River issues that I'll talk about today. And going back to some of the questions and the scaling kind of issues that were there, I think of a lot of what we're talking about is like nested dolls. You have the Colorado River Compact of 1922, which is this really big doll, right? And inside that, you have the Upper Colorado River Compact and the outcomes of Arizona v. California that Tanya mentioned, right? And then even inside the Upper Basin Compact, you have multiple other smaller compacts that work and operate amongst themselves within the framework of those broader compacts. And I think that also applies to some of the project work that Carolyn and Kyle talked about, and you'll hear more of. These layers of different projects and elements that work for themselves, and they work well, but they work within a framework that the people who operate them may or may not understand. But I'm here to tell you that those frameworks are really important. And so before I go into that, though, very much, I do have a few people to thank really quickly. And Sam and Mark, I just want to thank you for inviting me with my gray hair, and hopefully I can impart something that's helpful here to everybody. And then I want to thank John Hawley for being here, because sometimes I think without John Hawley and myself behind the 12th hole of the golf course at New Mexico Tech back in 1988, I might be somewhere else, because John and his enthusiasm for hydrogeology and geology within New Mexico really was one of those people who was very formative in my thinking and my wanting to kind of continue in public service, I think, ultimately, because that's what he had done. So thank you, John, and all your time. No, you're not. I think, John, I'm about the same age today or now as when we first met, as you were when we first met. So first I'll just say this will be, I think, in your packet a little later on. No test on it. It's 12 pages. It's the Upper Colorado River Basin Compact. I'm just going to talk about some parts of it today. And it, as 12 pages, is a pretty long compact. The Colorado River Compact that Tanya and Esteban talked about is actually, I think, 3 pages. But there's a lot packed in those things. And so for today, let's see, if I start this up, can I just go back here? Let's start with the first one. So when you're retired, you can take pictures. So I think you'll find that my presentation has a lot of photos in it, some old, some new. This is of Navajo Dam and Reservoir up on the San Juan River, west of and a little bit north of Farmington. And a very important water project for all of the San Juan Basin, but also all of the Rio Grande Basin in my mind, and hopefully I'll link back to that as we go along here. Esteban showed you this slide of the Colorado River Basin, and he talked in some detail about it, so I won't say a lot except that I think I can answer the question that I was first asked with this slide, and then I could stop if you wanted me to. And it's, why is New Mexico an upper basin state? And it's really because the negotiators of the 1922 compact said so. And the way they said it was as follows. They said, New Mexico, like Arizona and like Utah, has lands both within the upper basin and lower basin, so they are a state of the Colorado River Basin, but we don't touch the main stem. We don't touch the main stem of the Colorado, and just like Arizona doesn't really do that in a large part of the upper basin, and therefore we're going to call out divisions. And so I think it's an important thing for people to be aware of here is when you talk about the basin and what states are within the basin, lower or upper, New Mexico is in both, Arizona is in both, Utah is in both. But the lower division under the Colorado River Compact is Arizona, Nevada, California. The upper division is Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico. And really, I think that's the simple answer for that question. They looked at it, they talked about it and they made this decision. And that has continued through now over 100 years in how discussions and negotiations go forward on the Colorado River Basin. So Stevan talked about the lower basin part, and I'll just mention it briefly. I want to mention just one, maybe I'm going to modify my presentation a little bit, given I want to add to what other people said as opposed to repeating it. But when you look at the lower basin in New Mexico, it's really this little part of the Gila River system in San Francisco in southwest New Mexico, and then the little Colorado River system around Gallup in the Zuni area. And there's not a whole lot of water that comes through those areas. They're kind of headwaters. You get rain, you have water. You don't have rain or snow, you don't have water. And so the uses are pretty low. And in fact, in the Gila San Francisco side of it, you have that situation with a highly variable water supply, and then you have 2 court decrees that bind New Mexico and New Mexicans in what they do. And they bind them in ways that almost nobody else in the state is bound. I mean, essentially no outdoor watering, right? Very strict reporting requirements and so on. And Hannah Risley White and her staff under the ISC work with the state engineer's office to report on these decrees every year. People never hear about them. It's a different talk in its entirety. There's a lot of detail to it. But even if we had the ability really to develop there and put more water to use, there's all these other limitations that come into place and makes it very difficult. So, then we get to the San Juan Basin of New Mexico. And I think, has anybody here not physically been to the San Juan Basin? Hands? Anybody in there? Okay, so everybody, one or just a couple there. What we're talking here, the San Juan Basin is northwestern New Mexico. It's the area if you go on I-40 to Gallup and you drive from Gallup to Shiprock, you're going through really the western part of the San Juan Basin. If you drive up 550 from Bernalillo to Farmington, you're kind of cutting through the eastern and the central part of that basin. It is a elevated basin above 5,000 feet generally, up to about 7, but doesn't have any big mountains in it. Doesn't have actually perennially flowing water except for the San Juan River, right, which originates out of Colorado, almost in its entirety. And so in that area, you just want to think about San Juan Basin, a large portion of New Mexico, semi-arid, very little snowmelt runoff, yet this is the place that New Mexico gets and uses most of its Colorado River water. And so Stevan talked about that for the San Juan Basin being the major piece of it. For everything that Kyle and Carolyn talked about, the other major water user of Colorado River water is the Rio Grande Basin, really from Taos, New Mexico down to Elephant Butte Reservoir. And that's a very significant portion of the water supply, and it is the reason really why Albuquerque can exist like it does today in Santa Fe. The presenters talked about some of the factual pieces of the water deliveries and so on, but 5,000 acre feet of consumptive use water supply, approximately 5,600 for Santa Fe and Santa Fe County is a lot of water to consume by citizens. And 48,200 lives for the Water Authority. These are, that's the major water supply for those 2 municipalities. There are others, and I'll go into more detail about that in the MRGCD as I go along. So, from there, it's like going to the Upper Basin Compact of 1948. And I'm going to try to clear the clouds here a little bit and demystify that compact. It was negotiated from 1946 through 1948. And here's something for you guys to write down. Right. So what do you really need to have in place to make any large-scale public process go forward? Right? we've already been talking today a little bit about legal and a little bit about technical, right? I would say as we go along, you need political and you need administrative in order for things to go forward in almost any major project that you do. And one of the things that I pulled out of my research in looking at this compact is how aligned within New Mexico the negotiators were. From Governor Mabry, who was the governor of New Mexico at that time, to John Bliss, who was initially the compact commissioner for New Mexico, but then passed away during the negotiations. And then Judge Fred Wilson was involved there. They were aligned, and you can read it. When you go through, maybe it's my years of doing this, but I can read it, that they knew where they were trying to head, and they had alignment in what they were doing. Like Tanya said, though, and like Esteban said, there were a lot of things that weren't there. There weren't any tribes, right? There was the federal government. There were no women, but that it was really a number of white men that were pushing this stuff. But they knew what they were trying to do, and they knew why they were doing it. And in fact, the other states knew also, because they had been told. And a part of that was, if you think about the 1922 compact, it apportions the waters of the Colorado River system, the main stem of it, amongst these 7 states at Leaf Ferry, right? And it provides a certain amount of water that can be consumed by man in the upper basin and the lower basin, but it doesn't say what the individual states get. And that's a big deal. Not having that tie-in or having that tie-in is a big deal. Refer you back to Texas v. New Mexico on the Rio Grande. I mean, and ultimately, the state of Texas was saying for New Mexico, we don't know what we got. Well, in 1946, the federal government was telling the upper basin states, we don't know what you got. And so within that, by the way, this is Green River down by Mineral Bottom. If you've been there, it's pretty cool. The Bureau of Reclamation in March of 1946 said there is not enough water available in the Colorado River system for all potential projects. The need for determination of the rights of the respective states, yada, 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 is most pressing. And essentially, this is no different than what the Commissioner of Reclamation was telling the 7 basin states 2 years ago about the need to get together and try to come up with a consensus plan for the Colorado River system. Here, they were just saying it for the upper basin. And so if you step back from where we are today and what these assumptions we make about our water supply situation, what's reliable or not, in 1946, there were no big reservoirs above really Lake Mead, right? All the states needed the federal government to come in and support putting those projects in place. And why were they important? Well, they're important for 3 reasons. One was storage above Leaf Ferry. Because if you had stored water above Leaf Ferry, you could normalize or regulate the flow at Leaf Ferry to better meet the 75 and 10 requirement of the Colorado River Compact. Without that, it was just the natural variability. The river went from 4 million acre feet in a year to well over 20 million acre feet in a year. If that 20 million passes you by and you have a bunch of 4 million acre feet years after that, you really have very little to develop for anybody upstream. And in fact, there were not any of what we call the CRISPA projects, I'm sorry for the acronyms, Colorado River Storage Project Act. There are multiple smaller reservoirs upstream of Lake Powell than what Esteban lined out before. And those projects, things like Navajo Reservoirs 1, but Lemon and Vallecitos, and one of Tanya's favorites, Lake Nighthorse, those little projects, small, for the basin as a whole, make all the difference in the world in a headwater situation of having a reliable water supply. None of that existed in 1946. All the states except for California wanted that. And Arizona wanted it too because they actually wanted the Central Arizona project and they wanted some certainty off of that. So there was a real incentive to come to the table. See. Oh, there we go. Within that, when the compact negotiators came together to Congress, because we haven't said it here, but I hope everybody knows that an interstate compact is what you put together. It's one of the ways you put together an agreement amongst states that stops them from going to war or fighting about things, right? And so in order for that to be fully recognized, it needs to be the law of the state, each of the individual states, and it needs to be ratified by U.S. Congress and signed by the president. Really very unique kind of situation here. And California wasn't at the table, for these actual negotiations, but they certainly were and had representation in the U.S. Congress in the House, and they could make sure, and they did, that the Colorado River Compact of 1922 was recognized. What they said in many different places is, we want the Upper Basin states to recognize the Colorado River Compact as the master compact. The states didn't quite say that, but in many places they acknowledge that in the Upper Basin Compact, they acknowledge that the Colorado River Compact is the controlling document. So, within that, go back to New Mexico. Think about the time period that we're in this area and the fact that the San Juan Basin generates very little water. And we go through this 2-year negotiation, 8 meetings, 50 workshops, and New Mexico comes out of it with 11.25% of the Upper Basin supply. If you were able to fully develop that 11.25% of 7.5 million, as Esteban mentioned, that would be 840,000 approximately acre foot per year of human consumptive use. I think that those last few words are really important here because it's not the overall consumption in the basin, it's the consumption by man specifically that's being called out here. Not diversion, the depletion by man's activities. And that's a lot of water. Just to put that into context, it's way more. It would be more than the middle Rio Grande and the upper Rio Grande in New Mexico combined in an average year. So it's a lot of water. I talked about this one, so I think I'll just go past it real quick. Where is it? Can you guys read this slide? I'll just talk about this real quick. So I mentioned it being really a little bit of water, but I mean, it is like tiny. New Mexico contributed from 1914 to 1945 less than 1.3% of the water supply. Well, 1.3% of the water supply that made it to Leaf Erie. Nothing. And in fact, in this compact, when you look at the negotiations, Colorado is saying across the board, look, you get all your water from us. And potentially we could hold all of that and you couldn't get it because you create very little of it and you have almost no irrigated land whatsoever. We had 39,000 acres of irrigated land in about 1945. It got up into the low 40s a few years after that. That's not very much, 70,000 acre feet of consumption. So at the time of the signing of this compact, we weren't contributing very much to Leaf Erie, and we weren't consuming very much. I'll go forward here a little bit. So John Fleck writes about this, and I know Tanya and Esteban know it, and I know some of our tribal friends know it. But throughout the writing in the minutes of these compact negotiations, and primarily in the minutes, a little bit in the congressional hearings, there are statements that are interesting, sometimes a little bit disquieting. They say a lot of Indians and whites. That's pretty much how they framed a lot of the discussion that went there. But specifically for New Mexico, the New Mexico commissioners made it very clear, and the other commissioners supported that there would be very significant tribal claims for water within New Mexico, and that the apportionment for New Mexico should take that into account. And how did they account it? They relied on the Department of Indian Affairs. I found no information in any of the reading that I have that they asked for the individual tribes to participate or that they got any participation. It was essentially what the Department of Indian Affairs provided to the negotiators that what was used. And then New Mexico also made a statement, as did all of the other upper basin states, is we have demands within and outside the basin above those, and we'd like to basically try to develop off of that. New Mexico was trying to develop another 300,000 acre feet. So where am I for time? Could I go just a couple more minutes, Sam or others? I just want to talk a little bit about what the other things that the compact does that's important for New Mexico. It's Article 8 of the compact creates the Upper Colorado River Commission. And I think it's really important to be engaged in this. This commission has a lot of responsibilities. Esteban is our commissioner there. Mike Hammond is an alternate commissioner with this. But ultimately, for curtailment or shortage and how those are determined, this commission is the definitive body for making those determinations. And for a number of reasons, that's really important. Next, just a few other things that the negotiators within New Mexico were seeking to get in here. And I can't read this on here anymore, but Article 9 is the compact article that facilitates in one state a project being developed to provide water for use in another state. Without that article, you wouldn't have the San Juan Chama project. You wouldn't have the Animas La Plata project. So really important, a lot of forethought and foresight in that negotiation. The La Plata Compact of 1922 is not affected by this compact. It's nested within the Upper Colorado River Compact. The 1922 compact on the La Plata just operates as its language provides, and we determine what the depletions are, or actually Hannah and her people do now, and report that. And so they all kind of work together within that. And then Article 14 apportions the use of the San Juan River between Colorado and New Mexico. There were actually a lot of questions of like, why should New Mexico be an upper basin state? Why don't we just have a separate compact for them in Colorado on the San Juan, and then they won't be in this, right? Well, there's a number of reasons why the states decided not to do that. Other states, Utah, Wyoming, they had similar issues amongst smaller rivers. So they have a number of articles in this compact that relate to each of those other rivers. But a really important point for everybody here to remember, going back to one of my earlier statements about needing strong political support to move things forward, if you have 4 upper division states and 3 lower division states, how many more senators does the upper division have than the lower division? And that's important. And it was certainly important in these time periods. So really quickly, since 1948, when this compact was put in place, all of the projects, or almost all of the projects that are listed on this slide, and I don't think I have time to go through all of them, but there's a very large number, were built and put in place. Billions of dollars have been spent in New Mexico building water infrastructure. $2 billion is being spent right now on the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project, which rely really ultimately on this compact to set up the framework for how much water is available that then goes into the 2009 Navajo settlement that Tanya and Esteban were involved in, and then from my experience helping to build that out with the Bureau of Reclamation, Navajo Nation, Hickory's, and Gallup over the last 20 years. San Juan Chama project, all of these things, right? Here's just another list, and you'll get this set of slides when the document is produced. But all of these different users on the Middle Rio Grande that supplement the supply of Middle Rio Grande uses with San Juan Chama water coming in, right? Huge benefits to the Middle Valley, huge economic benefits, huge environmental benefits, and way more than that. So in total, when you look at it today, we're consuming by man's activities a little over 400,000 acre feet of water a year, right? Compared to 70,000 acre feet in 1948. The 70,000 acre feet is protected from curtailment under the terms of both the Colorado River Compact and the 1948 Compact. Everything else is junior. You know, Esteban brought up the San Juan Chama project is pretty junior in this, and it certainly is. But in reality, all of New Mexico's big federal projects are junior. It's really just if through lawsuits the tribal rights are recognized as having a prior and paramount or senior right, that those are protected. So New Mexicans are in this together, and we're using a lot more water. We got a lot of big benefits out of the Upper Colorado River Compact in 1948. Those are still being put in place. And in fact, there's more water up there to be developed. And I'll just bring that up there because it's Navajo Nation. I think we'll have a panel here just in a couple minutes that talks about the plans for the tribal nations. And for New Mexico, we have settled water rights on the San Juan with our two tribes. Right? What they're trying to do and what we're trying to help them do is develop their water supplies within their reservations and within New Mexico for the benefit of both the tribe and the state of New Mexico. And I tried to do that quite a bit as director of the ISC. I think Hannah and others are doing that. I would say to you all that that's really important because you have power plants that are going out of operation in that area. The water that they use is in the river. It's going down. It will provide part of the Leaf Ferry flow and part of the lower basin uses. But you know, to the extent the state of New Mexico, our water users, and the nations can get to agreement, there's water available there for their needs and New Mexico's needs. And the Hickory lease that Kyle talked about is just one example of it. And I think I'll end there. Okay. Any questions? I'd have to see you first. Dave.
Crystal,
oh, Crystal.
I was going to ask Crystal if she could bring up her panel while you address questions.
Oh, sure.
Crystal, maybe you could bring up your panel while Rolf addresses a question or two.
Yeah, thanks, Rolf. And I apologize for introducing more jargon, but just to clarify here, when you say more water is available to consume in the San Juan Basin, are you referring to liquid water or paper water? In other words, are we talking about rights or are we talking about actual water sitting around that could be, you know, piped, consumed, et cetera?
Thanks, Dave. That's a really good question, and my reply is both. You know, the construction and operation of Navajo Reservoir itself is huge in that. It's the second largest reservoir in New Mexico. It has 2 million acre foot capacity to it. It was put in place and designed to help for some of these tribal settlements and to put their water to beneficial use. And all of the analyses that were done took that into account, both for endangered species flows, trying to address climate change when we're looking at. They're just not fully developed out. And I think from that, I mean, Jenny and others can probably do a better job than I of talking about what the tribes are seeking to do with that, because that's where the majority of that water is. There's also some water within Lake Nighthorse and the Animas La Plata project that's wet water, too.
Let's give Rolf another great round of applause. Okay, well, I'm just humbled by the amazing knowledge here. So we're very lucky to have a panel led by Crystal Tully Cordova. She's now principal hydrologist of Navajo Nation Water Resources Water Management Branch. And I think it's just been amazing, her support for bringing the Navajo Nation into the realm of water research that we're doing in New Mexico. So I'm not going to go through your whole bio, but allow you to introduce your panel, and thank you so much for coming here today.
Good morning, everyone. I am privileged to be able to be joined here by members of the Jicarilla Apache Nation, as well as me representing the Navajo Nation. And it's important to understand, there are, what's represented here today are tribes that represent resolved water rights in the upper Colorado River Basin. It's important to also understand that there are tribes in the lower Colorado River Basin of the Colorado River that does not have their water rights resolved yet. And so we have commissioners from the Jicarilla Apache Nation Water Rights Commission, and then we also have Attorney Jenny Dumas, who definitely works on a lot of the water-related efforts with the Jicarilla Apache Nation. Oh, wrong one. Green. So I'll first start off by saying, Torchitni nashlankat nezahni bashichin, ashkanhed zaha edasha tuo heglini edashanale, Bistok Lijendej Gij Do Twalagai De Nasha, Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources, Banashnish, Principal Hydrologist Nishle. It's important to understand what I shared with you is my identity. So I'm of the Bitterwater clan, born for the Tango People clan. My maternal grandfather's clan is the yucca fruit strung on a line, and my paternal grandfather's clan is the water that flows together. And as Indigenous people who have been here for millennia, so I was at a water law conference the past 2 days, and I'm here with a lot of scientists, academics, and people from the state government as well as federal government. And I'm very pleased to also, see that there are students here as well from high school as well as college, because I think it's important to understand that we may have different perspectives of water and obviously different uses of water. And that was the title of the panel today. With that being said, it's important to understand the variable water uses. So with this map, you're probably familiar with it by now, and it's a map created to be able to describe that when we talk about Colorado River water, it's not necessarily just the outer boundary and inward where Colorado River water is used, but as you learned today from Rolf, really understanding, all the way from Taos, all the way down to Elephant Butte, and the majority of the prosperity being able to be here in Albuquerque and Santa Fe rely on Colorado River water. And so when you see Colorado River water in the news, it's important to be able to understand that if you live in those areas, that you may potentially be impacted. And this listing here is a law of the river. I know we started out with a foundational compact of 1922, but I think it's also important to highlight other acts that contribute to the law of the river. And that's inclusive of the Endangered Species Act. There are 2 species, the Colorado pike minnow and the razorback sucker, that are that occupy the San Juan River, and they're threatened and endangered species. And the Navajo Nation, as well as the Jicarilla Apache Nation, as well as NGO like the Nature Conservancy, the state and other tribes, Southern Ute, Mountain Ute, and as well as the state of New Mexico and federal government are included in working to recover the fish species, although the authorizing act will end in 2023 which is now, but congressional legislation has been introduced to extend that program. With that being said, it's also important to understand, as Commissioner Lopez did talk about the future, what's on the horizon with the Colorado River, and it's important to highlight that because although they are to operate Lake Powell and Lake Mead, what may be done to support those elevation levels may impact the upper basin water. And we've seen that in the past with the drought response operations plan before the great reprieve that we had with the winter precipitation. It's important to just highlight that. And so the supplemental environmental impact statement is a supplement to the 2007 interim guidelines. So essentially it would be from 2024 to 2026. The post 2026 is those next probably couple of decades, although it hasn't been determined how long that would last into the foreseeable future. So I wanted to highlight, because we're talking at the New Mexico Water Conference, the tribes in New Mexico. And this is a map that's a great map because, one, it has Mexico and it has tribes in it, where before, unfortunately, past maps did not include both Mexico and tribes. So with that being said, I represent the largest land-based tribe and the largest populated tribe, not only in the Colorado River Basin, but within the United States. And it's important to understand that there in New Mexico, in the Colorado River Basin, there are the Ute Mountain Ute, the Hickory, Apache Nation, Navajo Nation, and the Zuni tribe. And then two of those tribes, as mentioned, Navajo Nation and Hickory, Apache Nation, have resolved rights. Unresolved rights exist for Ute Mountain Ute tribe, as well as the Pueblo of Zuni and the Navajo Nation. So I also wanted to have a picture to be able to highlight the cultural water uses, because I know sometimes when we talk about paper water and we try to secure those water rights associated with tribal uses, either through settlement or through litigation, quantifying cultural uses is really difficult to do. You can't put a meter on it, you can't put a value system on it, and it's important to understand that these cultural uses include traditional practices that involve water from different types of water types, either from the San Juan River itself or from springs or from groundwater. In our tribe specifically, we have a lot of ceremonies that water is a major contributor to those ceremonies that are conducted to help with the health of individuals that are getting help through ceremonies. I wanted to highlight this project. This project is an important project, not only for the Navajo Nation. It was authorized under Public Law 111-11, but the beneficiaries not only include the Navajo Nation, it also includes the Hickory Apache Nation, as well as the city of Gallup. And the purpose is to be able to construct approximately 300 miles of pipeline, have multiple storage tank, booster pump stations. But really, from my perspective, it's an opportunity to be able to mitigate against climate change impacts on hydrology by diversifying our water portfolio, by not only relying on groundwater, but now through this project that's being built, have the opportunity to be able to have surface water and groundwater support 43 Navajo communities and be able to not only do that, but interconnect public water systems. Because the 50-year water plan has been put out for New Mexico. And when you read climate change impacts on hydrology and you think about how to mitigate against those challenges, diversifying your water portfolio as well as including interconnecting public water systems are ways to be able to create that future and security for residents, and particularly with this project, for Navajo residents. With that being said, the diversion water right is 22,650 acre feet per year. The depletion amount is there. One thing to note is this project is currently under construction, and it includes the San Juan lateral, which is the larger lateral of the two, and the Cutter lateral. The Cutter lateral is currently providing water to 8 Navajo communities. There are 110 Navajo communities that are currently getting water for the past 3 years from this project. Under construction includes that San Juan lateral as well as the Cotalkers lateral, which is between north of Gallup in Yatahé, New Mexico, to Sabonito, New Mexico. And every day I have the great opportunity to be able to drive by the construction and see the progress that's being made, being able to see those pipes delivered, put into the ground, and the people that continue to work in really, cold climate. I don't know if you know, but the area in Gallup it's about 10 degrees colder than Albuquerque, and a while back it was only 10 degrees in the morning. And seeing these people work on this project really brings happiness to me, because to know that they're invested in helping close the clean water access gap. Other water uses that the Navajo Nation has includes San Juan River farming. We do have the Hogback Irrigation Project, as well as the Fruitland Irrigation Project. And unfortunately, during the Gold King mine spill, these family-owned farms were definitely impacted because of the water sources that they had. But so they're still in a stage of coming back because of the stigma associated with contamination. Although a lot of work has been done at WRRI conferences on the Animas in San Juan to be able to highlight that the soils are okay, the water is okay, the vegetables being grown don't have any traces of contamination. But it's really hard for people who don't have that academic background to be able to understand that. And so these are the associated sizes of the farms. And Hogback Irrigation Project is 8,830 acres with a diversion of 48,550 acre feet per year. And Fruitland Irrigation Project with an area of 3,305 acres and a diversion of 18,180 acre feet per year. So we have farms like that are smaller scale. We also have dryland farming in the San Juan River Basin, which essentially uses the precipitation that falls on the ground, but at the same time uses groundwater. I'm from a family in the San Juan River Basin that were dryland farmers, and so you'd have a bucket of water, you'd have a cup, and every plant you'd go down the row and water them cup by cup. And it was a lot of work. I did this with my grandparents as well as my parents, but to be able to see during harvest time what could grow in this dry desert region and be able to reap the fruits of labor is really nice. So we do have larger projects like the Navajo Indian Irrigation Project, which was authorized under Public Law 87-483, and it is 110,630 acres. Unfortunately, although it was an authorized project, with the changing prices, has not seen to be full build out. It's currently at 70% complete. And then the diversion amount for that is 508,000 acre feet per year. But because we don't have it at full build out, we use less than that amount. And then in addition to that, we have the opportunity to have access to Animas La Plata project water. And this is Lake Nighthorse, a picture of Lake Nighthorse. And that has the opportunity to have a diversion of 4,680 acre feet per year. So this table is taken out of the tribal water study that was done in collaboration with tribes as well as the Bureau of Reclamation. And the table lists Navajo Nation diversions and depletion. And so when you look at the total amount of opportunity to access San Juan River water in New Mexico, it's over 600,000 acre feet per year. But when you think about the basin as a whole, the tribes have, I believe it's over 63% of the water rights in the San Juan River Basin, but it's important to understand that with the climate change impacts, such as the increased magnitude and the increased frequency of drought events, the challenges associated with accessing that full paper water right may be a challenge, as well as the infrastructure that has not been fully developed today. But I also wanted to highlight the energy aspect, because I know we're talking about water, this is a water conference, but it's important to understand about hydropower energy and how you may be impacted. I don't know how many of you know where your energy comes from when you flip on the switch. I think it's important to consider thinking about where your energy comes from, because, for example, for Navajo Nation, a large portion of our energy portfolio does come from Colorado River Storage Project, as well as for not only for the in-home use electricity, but also for projects like the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project and the Navajo Indian Irrigation Project. I mean, places even like Lea County in New Mexico, their WAPA customers, Western Area Power Administration customers as well, that get their power from hydropower. So I just wanted to briefly highlight, with all this talk about a lot of the documents that have been prepared associated with Bureau of Reclamation managing the system, the Drought Response Operations Plan, there is a section in there, 7.2, that includes the participation of Upper Basin tribes, and the tribes have worked together as well as with the state and the federal government to be able to have this included in the document that was signed by a Secretary of Interior, so that there was greater opportunity for engagement of tribes in the Drought Response Operations Plan, which will be expiring when the 2007 interim guidelines expire in 2026. One thing to highlight is, with the opportunity to be able to see Federal Register notice for the supplemental environmental impact statement, the supplement to the 2007 interim guidelines, is what was highlighted here. And so what it states is current reservoir conditions and operating guidelines are insufficient given the hydrology or reservoir conditions and the anticipated event that the runoff conditions may change in the future. And so basically describing those 2007 interim guidelines didn't include the hydrology that anyone ever anticipated. Basically, it was worse than anyone ever anticipated, and that's why there's a supplemental EIS that is needed to be able to address that situation. So the Navajo Nation has been very vocal about in public opinions about their stance on during scoping periods and public comment periods, because when there are mechanisms done to protect elevation levels at PAL, for example, there are 3 units that are considered: Flaming Gorge, the Aspinall unit, which includes Blue Mesa, and the Navajo Reservoir. The Navajo Nation has storage and inflow rights, and then we have, I guess to be clear, we have storage rights at Navajo Reservoir, and we have inflow rights to the San Juan River. And with that being said, when there are releases from upper basin reservoirs to help with elevation levels at PAL, there's a potential vulnerability of Navajo to be able to access the water that they have the water right claim to. So we describe not only that our concerns associated with that, we describe our hydropower concerns, our cultural and natural resource concerns, our socio and economic development concerns, as well as recreation concerns and the agricultural water supply concerns. Our most recent public comment, if you're interested in reading more about this, they're on Reclamation's website, and is our post-2026 letter that our new president had submitted as well, and we will be submitting another letter before the December 11th timeline for the latest opening of the public comment period. I did want to show this picture again. I know it was shared before, but just thinking about how things have changed over the years. Definitely 100 years of the way things have existed is hard to change, But if you have the right people and the right allies in the room, there's greater opportunity for more voices to be heard, more perspectives to be shared, rather than assumptions being made about what different water users' perspectives are. And so the picture on the left is a Navajo Nation event that we hosted at, well, this is at Glen Canyon Dam, but we hosted a meeting at Antelope Point Marina. And if you think about how far the Navajo Nation extends, we do have a Navajo community that is adjacent to Page, Arizona, and our Antelope Point Marina is on Lake Powell. And then the other two pictures is the same picture that was shown by Esteban, and then the last picture was the first meeting of the 38 sovereigns in Phoenix, Arizona, related to the focus on the post-2026 framework. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. I always hate to speak after Crystal. If I had known that, I would have asked to go first. But I'm Jenny Dumas, and I am legal counsel for Water Matters for the Hickory Apache Nation. And I have with me Stanford Salazar, who is the chair of the nation's Water Commission, and Romaine Wood, who is the vice chair of the nation's Water Commission. And I'm just going to do, I can start out with great minds think alike, because a lot of the things that we wanted to discuss today have been, Crystal touched on some of them. I heard Rolf touch on some of them. I heard that Kyle touched on the lease with the nation also earlier. So a lot of stuff that we're really excited about that I think a lot of people are excited about. So you'll be hearing some of the same themes. So I just wanted to start out first with a brief introduction about the nation's water rights in the Colorado River system, and then have our water commissioners talk about a really important project right now to get water onto the nation's lands, which I've also heard. I've seen the map already a couple times in just an hour and a half being here, and heard lots of reference to it. So this is just starting with the, I don't know, oh, here we go. Yeah, this is a mural actually up on the Hickory Apache Nation that one of our former water commissioners took a picture of. And the other side of it says, water is life. So, you know, the water is a very, is at the forefront of everyone's minds right now. And I thought this was beautiful, so I'm gonna start with that. So we've seen this map a million times today already, but, oh, look here. So the Navajo River flows through the nation's lands and is, of course, part of the Colorado River system. And Hickory's lands are right up there close to Navajo Dam in the upper basin. The nation has historic use rights in both the Navajo River and the Rio Chama. So that's what the nation uses for its domestic, commercial, industrial, everyday uses on the nation's lands. In 1992, the nation settled its water rights with the United States. And in that settlement, there were recognized 40,000 acre feet of reserved future use winters water rights from the Navajo River for the nation with an 1880 priority. But the interesting part of the nation settlement is the nation actually agreed to forego exercise of those rights. There's a lot of provisos to that, but that's the basic setup. In exchange for delivery of water at 2 off-reservation locations. So one of those locations is the Navajo Dam. And at Navajo Dam, the nation receives delivery of 33,500 acre feet of water. And at Heron Dam, through the San Juan Chama project, the nation receives 6,500 acre feet of water. And an important part of the nation's settlement is it was expressly provided for in that settlement, unlike a lot of other tribal settlements, especially ones that are this old, that the nation could use that water for marketing. So to the extent the nation didn't need the water on its reservation or couldn't use the water at that time, they could lease the water to other folks off the reservation. And the nation has done that since 1992 and has had an extremely successful water marketing program. One thing I also wanted to mention that Rolf also touched on was the water for the nation settlement does come out of the state's Law of the River allocation. So the 11.25% that's allocated to New Mexico, the nation's 40,000 is nestled in that. So here's a map, and this shows the nation's reservation lands. And also it shows the location of the reservoirs vis-a-vis those reservation lands. So you can see that the 33.5 that gets delivered at Navajo, that is not terribly close to the nation's reservation land. There is no way for the nation to take water from Navajo Dam and use it on the reservation currently. A little bit more on that later. But it's very far away, and it's not terribly accessible, except for leasing at this point. There's also Heron Dam, where the 6,500 is delivered, and that's right up against the reservation. It looks like, they could use it on the reservation. Well, that's not true. The geography of that area, the dam is much lower than where the nation's lands are. So even though it looks like, we could just dip into that and use that, that's also not true. So the nation, up until very recently, had no ability to use that 40,000 on the reservation itself. And so the nation's domestic supply comes out of the Navajo River, which you can see that flowing like right through the top of the reservation, right near the community of Dulce, which is the primary community that the nation has on its reservation. And so most of the water comes out of the Navajo River, but there are people that live all over the reservation. And there is not currently a way to deliver water to those folks, especially at the southern end of the reservation, it's an hour drive from Dulce down to the southern end of the reservation. So it's a big area. Admittedly, not as big as the Navajo Nation, which you could drive for days and days across. But it's a long way. And so there are folks, there is water hauling on the nation. There is reliance on wells. So there really is a need for a better water supply in other areas of the reservation. And so when the Navajo Nation was creating the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project, the city of Gallup got involved in it, and so did the Hickory Apache Nation. Those folks said, look at this. This pipeline that Navajo is going to build, that the feds are going to build for Navajo as part of its settlement, that's going to come not too far from areas where we need water. And so the nation decided to become a participant in that project. And once it's complete, it will deliver up to 1,200 acre feet of treated drinking water to the Hickory Apache Nation at the southern end of the reservation. And right now, the federal portion of the construction is finished. So the pipeline all the way up to the reservation boundary has been completed. And the nation right now, so you can see on this map, the little part that says reach 24.1 Jan stub, that is where the pipe comes off of what we call the cutter lateral and brings water over to the reservation boundary. That's completed, and now the nation is working on constructing its own pipeline to move that water from that reservation boundary to the ultimate place where the nation's going to use it. And now I'm going to hand this over to our water commissioners to talk about that process and why it's important to the nation.
Good morning, everyone. Again, following Crystal, I think Crystal's probably thinking we're stalkers because we've been following her and all these water conferences for the last month. Then I actually heard a name I haven't heard in a long time, Mr. Mike Hammond. Is he here? Oh, there you, Mike, Mr. Mike. He worked for the Hickory. He did a lot of good things for us back in the day, and I've probably seen you several times, Mike. But I think since we got older, and probably don't recognize each other too much. But no, as far as the Water Commission, myself and Mr. Wood have been appointed. We're going on our third week of being appointed to the Water Commission. I'd like to just, on my part, go over as far as what the water use for the community of Dulce at this time is going to be. Right now, we are upgrading the water system itself, the water treatment plant and the wastewater plant to fit the expansion of our community. We're also developing the infrastructure within the community as far as new water lines, new sewer lines to upgrade everything as far as that will benefit the Hickory Apache tribal membership. Also, by the direction of the Hickory Apache Nation Council, we are looking into kind of developing and setting up little storage ponds, I could say, to refill like Dulce Lake and Lajero Lake to get them refilled. That way we have emergency water set, just so in emergencies that when the droughts come in, because right now as far as where we're at, we're going on almost 6 years of drought. From the time I've been part of the Water Commission and as far as being part of the administration of the Hickory Apache Nation. So a lot of the issues, I think we face with the Navajo Gallup Water Project, with the help of them and getting things moving down south. But as far as the community itself, we are going to be benefiting and using the water to adapt as far as to get the growth of our community to fit the enrollment as far as the tribal members are concerned. Other uses that we have for that area at this time is, we also had the emergency uses of Chama Valley. When they end up using had an emergency where the water system failed them, so we ended up assisting and helping the Chama Valley Township. So we try to do our best to assist and help everybody as much as possible. But other than that, with the growth of our community, our water and wastewater system is going to be developed. Right now, it's kind of a little outdated. I think Mike will remember as far as a lot of the stuff that he did for us to redevelop our wastewater treatment plant. And once we get everything up to date, I think it will benefit and help our community grow more. So that's for our township of Dulce. Mr. Wood will go over as far as what we're going to be planning for the southern end. Thank you.
Dunjo, hello. My name's Romaine Wood. Like Mr. Salazar stated, we're newly commissioners for Hickory Apache Nation. We've only been there 3 weeks or so, I'm also a voting member of the TIF board for Indian Affairs. So going back to what Stanford had said, as far as our community of Dulce, we're finally looking at backup water supply. And we just secured funding for the planning and the design stage of that portion and everything. So that's going to be happening this coming year to get backup water supply for the community of Dulce. And as far as down south, securing our water rights was real important for our tribe, because not only our headquarters is Dulce, but we have membership that live throughout the reservation. And on the southern portion of the reservation, we have water wells and, the aquifers drying up and stuff. And so thankful for Navajo for that project, the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project, that securing our water rights for the Navajo goes to Navajo Dam, like Jenny had explained. it also flows into Cutter Dam, which flows into the Cutter Lateral. And I'd like to thank the BOR, Indian Affairs, and also the state of New Mexico for capital outlay funds for allowing us to build that pipeline now to bring water, finally bringing water to our people on the southern part of our reservation. I mean, that's real valuable, for us and everything. It's good to see you again, Mike, but Mike did a lot for us while he was there. Jenny does a lot for us, and we're still learning. Me and Stanford, he's a past councilman, and I just got off our tribal council this last year, and but at that level, you got so much thrown on your plate, getting into the water now and everything. I'm learning a lot and everything, and I'm sure Stanford is too, and I'm real thankful for people like her that have done a lot for our people, but that's what we're doing with the Cutter Lateral down south right now. Thank you.
All right, I know it's almost lunchtime, so we'll finish up pretty quickly here. I mentioned water marketing. So the nation has successfully marketed their water that's delivered at the off-reservation locations for many years. But it's not always been smooth sailing. So as Rolf mentioned, the water that's delivered up at Navajo Dam was in the past largely going to support energy production and coal fired power plants. And over the last couple years, folks know that those have been closing. And so a lot of the nation's biggest leases for water delivered in Navajo Dam were either expired and not renewed or canceled. And so for the last couple of years, not the most recent, but a couple years back beyond that, a large portion of the nation's water delivered at Navajo Dam was going completely unused. And that was a big problem for the nation because, one, it's a huge source of revenue, and it's the revenue that the nation uses to pay for its construction cost share obligations to build the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project, which are a lot of money. And so the nation uses its lease revenues to pay for development of important water projects. And the nation wasn't getting revenue for those. Only had a couple of small ones, like a little lease to Elks Lodge, a couple of small leases to oil and gas producers, but that big chunk of water was just going down the river. And so that began discussions with the state of New Mexico. Ralph was a leader in that effort to discuss how can we fix this problem. And how can we keep that water in New Mexico to benefit New Mexico communities and also address the problem of the nation being able to realize the value of its settlement water? And so after several years of work and coordination, a lease project was developed, and it's a three-way partnership between the Nature Conservancy, the state of New Mexico through the Interstate Stream Commission, and the Hickory Apache Nation. The Nature Conservancy has obviously interests in protecting endangered and threatened fish species in the river. The state of New Mexico has similar interests and also interests in protecting the water supply for communities. And the nation shares those interests and also wants to put its water to use. And so we came up with this project, and really it allows the Interstate Stream Commission to lease up to 20,000 acres of water per year for placement in the state strategic water reserve. And the amount is dependent on funding, right? So if we can get funding, then they lease more, and if they can't get funding, they lease less. And so that's dependent on appropriations from the legislature, which we all know are not terribly reliable. They're year to year or, on a cycle. So that's where TNC comes in. That's one place that TNC comes in. So TNC also privately fundraises to support this lease. And then the state and TNC decide how they're going to divide up how much water they want to order and how they're going to divide up payment. But in the interim, there's lots of coordination between the various scientific personnel that work for the nation's fish biologists, folks within the ISC, and I think I saw Colleen here. She's one of the folks on our team, and science experts from TNC. And they meet regularly to decide what's the best use of this water this year to meet the needs of the lease and the fish. And so we've done a couple of, the scientists have come up with what's the best time to release the water, how much should we release when, and this year was the first time water was released under that lease. So, and it's really important because it is the first time that we could really find a true government-to-government arm's-length transaction between the state of New Mexico and a tribal nation. So we have lots of contracts between tribes and the states all the time. And usually it involves giving money or giving access, things like that. But they're largely an adhesion contract. One party says, the state says, this is what we're going to do, and the tribe sends it. Well, this wasn't that kind of transaction at all. This was a true government-to-government negotiation, and we really had to develop new provisions for how are we going to resolve disputes? How are we going to deal with the fact that these parties have sovereign immunity? How are we going to protect the sovereign status and decision-making authority of each party in the transaction? And so it's an exciting transaction in that sense. And I think the folks that have worked on this transaction really feel like this is an opportunity to see how things that we thought we couldn't solve, like how are we going to solve that the nation's water is just going down the river for free? How are we going to solve that the state really needs more input into how water in the state is used? How are we going to protect the fish? And so coming up with transactions that can have not just one benefit, but 2 or 3 or 4, because we have less and less water in the system, and we need to have transactions that have more than a single purpose. They need to have multiple purposes. And not only is the water released pursuant to the lease, but also the scientists are figuring, well, when will we do that? And how could that best benefit the fish? So it's not just the release of the water, but when, and how much at any particular time. And we did release water for the first time under the lease this year, and these are pictures of the water lease celebration. And I want to show you all a film about, so we'll just close with the film about this project, so you guys can see what it looks like, in video. And then I'm just going to jump with also piggybacking on Crystal's presentation and some things I heard other folks say. Tribes haven't been involved in decision-making on the Colorado River for many, many years. And neither have people of color, and neither have women. It's been for a long time the old white guys. And those, you see this picture all the time because it is striking, because look around in this room, that's not the kind of people we have making water decisions and setting water policy anymore. It's a different group. And so one of the other things the nation's working on really hard and has been working on really hard for the last many years is really increasing tribal involvement in decision-making throughout the basin. And we have a lot of support for that here in New Mexico. I'm looking at Esteban and Rolf. We have really made a lot of progress. So this is a picture of our Tribe States dialogue. So for the last almost, I guess it's been more than a year now, we've been meeting every 2 months, the 6 upper basin states and the UCRC commissioners from each of the upper basin states have been meeting in person to have conversations about how water policy is being developed and how that's going to impact tribes and how tribes can participate in that. And we have developed a framework of shared goals and really strong relationships, and really it's for the first time since I've been doing this work. I've been a lawyer representing tribes exclusively for more than 20 years now. This is the first time I've seen anything like this. A real, true, sovereign-to-sovereign communication about water policy. So it's huge, and I think our state has been a huge leader in making that happen. So I wanted to share that picture with you all. And then I don't know how to get to the movie. So maybe, I don't know if somebody with the tech can help play that. Okay.
My family has heard about this deal so much over the past 4 years. I have a 5-year-old at home, and I was talking to him about what I do and what was happening, and he turned to me and he said, "Mom, are you a water superhero?" And I said, "Maybe, I don't know." Being his hero and helping to conserve the river for his generation is really what drives me.
We're here to celebrate a novel relationship between 3 partners, the Hickory Apache Nation, the Nature Conservancy, and the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission. A historic partnership, really, where we are leasing water to the benefit of the river and the fish and the environment.
As water becomes more scarce, we need to figure out the best ways to most efficiently use it to benefit all the users in the basin. This is a real win-win-win. It's got super benefits for figuring out innovative solutions to the water crisis that we're facing in the Colorado.
The Hickory Apache Nation have developed, relationships, not only with the state of New Mexico, but the NGO community, the conservation community. And having built those relationships, it became really apparent that there was a willingness at the state level to come up with a unique solution. So we're here today to celebrate the release of that water.
There are 2 endangered fish in this segment of the river, the Colorado pike minnow and the razorback sucker, and they're really dependent on these high flows to create the habitats they need to both reproduce and rear their young. The crisis on the Colorado is affecting the fish in ways that are similar to the effects of all water users. It's the scarcity issue. We're not seeing the kind of volumes of water in the river that would have been here in the last century, for instance. The flows are just a lot lower. Part of it is understanding how this works in the overall water management of the Colorado River Basin. Part of it is working very closely and co-creating this with the tribal leaders and understanding what their objectives are and what the benefits that they're trying to achieve are.
This agreement gives me hope for the future. I think it's an incredible example of collaborative partnerships crafting meaningful solutions to real challenges that we're facing in the Southwest related to water scarcity.
Hopefully, the example that the Hickory Apache Nation, the Nature Conservancy, and the state of New Mexico set will set another example to the other basin states in terms of the relationships that are possible with a state sovereign and a tribal sovereign, and how our other partners can aid in building those relationships.
This collaboration is something that will inspire these kinds of agreements throughout the Colorado River Basin. We're facing challenges managing water for competing demands. It's going to take a lot of creative folks coming to the table with their various interests to negotiate agreements like this one in order to solve the problems that we're facing.
Yeah, so with that, I think if folks have questions, we can answer them or else go to lunch.
It looks like we're pushing into our lunch hour, so I would encourage any of our attendees who might have questions for any of the presenters to look for them throughout the conference, including at our lunch, which we'll be going into right now. So thank you, and just another round of applause for our panel.